Chapter 207. Why did Mumas come looking for trouble with Amon, and how did he get out of the underworld? Things had to start from the beginning. His background was different from that of Amon. His sister, Peloponnes, was guided by Ea, the god of wisdom, very early on and became an emissary of the Anunnaki divine clan, helping Ea to create the word God on earth. Some of the habits of the Anunnaki gods were different from those of the Igut Ennead. The Ennead of Igut built a very large Ennead palace together for the emissaries to live and train in, while the gods of the Anunnaki tended to build their own divine palaces. Peloponnes was not good at fighting with others, and her temper was peaceful and gentle. It was said that she could make the breeze and the mountain springs produce melodious sounds like songs, and Ea's divine palace was the most beautiful. Peloponnes also had the 9th level of the power of origin, and was known as the goddess Peloponnes, and it was said that she was the one closest to the gods among the emissaries. At her request, Ea agreed to guide Dums to join the Anunnaki divine clan, but this was only a kind of permission, and the secret of the power of origin was taught to Dums by Peloponnes, not Ea. Dums was a famous handsome boy in the Anunnaki divine clan, and he learned the secret of becoming a god with almost no hardship. He was able to train in the most beautiful divine palace on earth and received the most careful guidance. He was handsome and proud, and the power he trained was also very strong. The bamboo staff in his hand was once a relic of Tiamat's ship. When Tiamat fell in the battle of the gods, the bamboo staff became Ea's trophy, and Ea gave it to Peloponnes, and Peloponnes gave it to Dums. The snake carving on the bamboo staff contained a part of Tiamat's spiritual imprint, which turned out to be the experience of a snake. This imprint was also a cultivation secret of a strange divine technique. By refining this bamboo stick and becoming one with one's mind, one would be able to grasp this mysterious technique. Not only would one be able to transform into a snake, but they would also be able to use all kinds of powerful techniques. This was a small part of the secret that Tiamat had mastered. Back then, she was able to guide monsters like Humbaba, so it was not surprising that there was such a secret in her spiritual imprint. As the god of wisdom, Ea had long since transcended eternal life and was not interested in this kind of secret. Peloponnes did not want to cultivate this divine art either. Dums, on the other hand, spent 100 years to refine the bamboo stick. Not only did he refine it with his mind, but he also learned this mystical secret and obtained a powerful weapon. Although Dums was very powerful, his means were not as ruthless as Murin. At that time, Murin was furious and sent 3 oracles with the entangling vine net to set up an ambush, capture Dums in one fell swoop, and send him to the underworld of Queen Kella. Peloponnes went to find Amon because Amon had entered the underworld. Peloponnes thought that Amon should be responsible for being trapped in the underworld and should not let Dums suffer for him. As a result, when she went to find Amon, she was stopped by Murin. Amon told Peloponnes that he was not replaced by Dums, but that he had escaped from the underworld on his own. If Peloponnes wanted to save Dums, she should go to Kella herself. Peloponnes went to the underworld. The queen of the underworld, Kella, was known to be not to be trifled with. Even Murin was somewhat afraid of her and would never deal with her unless it was necessary. Peloponnes begged for a long time, and Queen Kella finally nodded and agreed to release Dums, but at the same time put forward a condition, unless Peloponnes could replace Dums with another god to serve in the underworld. The so-called gods of Kella were not really gods who had transcended eternal life, but oracles who had passed the test of endless life. Peloponnes had no choice but to replace Dums in the underworld with herself. After leaving the underworld, Dums had always wanted to find Amon. He also thought that the matter was caused by Amon, and the person who should really be responsible should be Amon. He wanted to catch Amon and replace Peloponnes. It was not easy to catch Amon. Amon was already the head of the Anyira Legion at that time and later became the supreme general of the empire, staying in the Ennead divine realm of Igut. Not long ago, Amon left Igut and entered the plains of Duk. He withdrew to Leng and built the shrine of Murin, but at the same time worshipped Murin and Ammonius, and held a ceremony to summon the gods to descend. Dums heard the news in the divine palace of Ea, and it was Bright Moon Night who came to the divine palace to recuperate from his injuries. Among the various divine palaces of the Anunnaki gods, the one with the most suitable environment for recuperating from injuries was the divine palace of Ea. Dums confirmed three things. First, Amon had left Igut and come to the Anunnaki divine realm. Second, Amon also had the 9th level achievement of the power of origin. Third, Amon had won the favor of Murin. At the thought of Peloponnes still suffering in the underworld while Amon was living so freely, how could Dums not be furious? He picked up his bamboo staff and immediately wanted to go find Amon, but was dissuaded by Bright Moon Night. Bright Moon Night told Dums that he had fought with Amon, and not only did he not gain the upper hand, but he had also escaped with injuries. Dums was probably not a match for Amon alone. Moreover, Amon's whereabouts were very secretive, and there was always a group of very powerful helpers around him. It was not easy to catch him, so he could only find an opportunity to strike when he was alone. This ambush was planned by Bright Moon Night. The King of Killers thought that Amon would definitely go in and out of the divine palace of Murin, and it was not convenient for him to have too many subordinates around him. So he waited quietly near the divine palace of Murin, and he would definitely find the best opportunity. Dums listened to Bright Moon Night's suggestion, but he did not believe that Amon was so powerful. How could a person who had just passed the test of endless arising and ceasing cycle compare to him? Dums was very proud, and he had never lost to anyone except Murin, so he decided to take down Amon himself and send him directly to the underworld. Bright Moon Night's persuasion was useless, and she could only say to Dums, "If you want to go alone, I will not stop you, but if you are not a match for him, we should make a backup plan. I will set a trap at the edge of the Assyrian plateau, and you will definitely be able to fall into it, so we will lure him there. When he falls into the trap, we will take the opportunity to strike outside, and he will definitely not be able to escape. My current injury has not fully recovered, so this is the best choice." Bright Moon Night was the best at ambush and assassination in the Anunnaki divine clan, and according to his suggestion, Dums really intercepted Amon, but he could not resist Amon, who was fighting desperately. Only then did he remember that Bright Moon Night had a backup plan, so he hurriedly escaped. He deliberately slowed down to lure Amon into the trap, but did not expect Amon to see that something was wrong at the critical moment, and forced out the hidden Bright Moon Night. This was what happened. Regarding the situation of the goddess Peloponnes, it was Murin's 3 subordinates who told Amon, and the rest was said by Bright Moon Night. Amon did find a trap between the cliffs of the mountain ahead, and it was very cleverly arranged. If he really accidentally followed Dums and fell onto the hillside, he would definitely not have a good end. The heart of the trap was a very hidden small formation, and if it was not touched, there was almost no abnormality. It required a lot of magic power to detonate in an instant, and only a few stones were blown away, but it made use of the structure of the mountain. Above the trap was a cliff that extended thousands of feet outwards, full of cracks and holes, and the rock layer was very weathered. If a hole suddenly exploded in the mountainside, this side of the mountain wall would collapse. In order to prevent Amon from escaping, this formation had another function, which was to instantly connect all the power of the collapsed mountain wall into one, firmly imprisoning the space where Amon was standing. When the trap detonated, Bright Moon Night and Dums worked together to block it, and no matter how capable Amon was, it would be difficult for him to escape. Even if he was a god who had transcended eternal life, if he was caught off guard, he would probably end up in a worrying state. Amon carefully investigated the structure of the trap according to Bright Moon Night's instructions, and after that, he took a deep breath and was also very afraid. Bright Moon Night was willing to tell all of this honestly because Amon promised not to kill him and would let him go. Shubra told Amon that the divine emissaries of the Anunnaki divine clan might fight with each other, but without the permission of the King of Gods, they could not kill the divine emissaries of the same divine clan. This was also one of the agreements between the gods after the War of the Gods. Shubra and the other 2 could help Amon take down Dums and Bright Moon Night, but it was not easy to kill them. But Amon was not a divine emissary of the Anunnaki divine clan, and since Dums and Bright Moon Night had already tried to kill him, it was reasonable for him to kill these 2 divine emissaries. Bright Moon Night had been beaten half to death, and when Amon asked him why he wanted to assassinate him, Bright Moon Night replied that it was Enlil who sent him. Bright Moon Knight himself had no grudge against Amon, and now that his life had fallen into Amon's hands, even he himself did not understand why Enril sent him to assassinate Amon. Enril was the god who guided him, and Bright Moon Knight had accepted this task, so he had to do it. Amon asked, "If I let you go, you will come back to assassinate me after you recover, otherwise you will not be able to free yourself from your mission, right?" Bright Moon Knight bowed his head and did not speak, but Amon felt a strong emotion in his heart. It was the great terror of life and death. With Bright Moon Knight's achievements, Amon's special ability usually did not work, but at this moment he could feel it so clearly, which meant that Bright Moon Knight was desperate and realized that he would die today. People like Bright Moon Knight may not be afraid of death, but they could not avoid the great terror of facing life and death. There were many kinds of human terror, such as encountering fierce beasts in the mountains, worrying that someone close to them would be hurt, living with corpses in a dark room, and so on. The meaning of terror was different, and it was not necessarily pure fear. On the battlefield, when the murderous spirit was boiling, the warriors would fearlessly charge at the enemy's swords and spears, not even having the time to think before they died. There were many such warriors. But if they were asked to face death calmly, the approach of death, and clearly feel the taste of life disappearing, most of them would not be able to stand it. And for a god like Bright Moon Knight, the situation was even more special. They had passed the test of endless life and seemed to have endless life, and also had the hope of becoming a true god who transcended eternal life. Their judgment of the value of life was naturally different, and they would never risk their lives unless they had no other choice. They would not even do things that threatened their lives, because it was not worth it. They clearly had seemingly endless life, but they could only watch themselves die like mortals. This great terror of life and death was difficult to understand without reaching the realm. Amon felt Bright Moon Knight's emotions, but he slowly told a story, the story of the temple of Isis's supreme warrior Gabriel being ordered to kill him. After he finished, he said to Bright Moon Knight, "I cannot kill you and let you go, and I can also give you a chance to free yourself from your mission. But you have to agree to one condition: if you feel that you have fully recovered, you can come to me and duel. Don't make any more ambushes or assassinations, wait until the day you are sure, and in the meantime, don't hurt my disciples or the people of Talang." Amon let Bright Moon Knight choose for herself: either die now, or make an oath to agree to this condition and integrate it into her spiritual imprint. Bright Moon Knight stood up and bowed to Amon. "I understand now why you were standing in the temple with Murin in your arms." And Dums was so angry. "In any case, I want to thank you for giving me this chance to choose. I swear to agree to your conditions, and when I am ready in the future, I will formally ask you for a duel." Bright Moon Knight told Amon everything she knew and was let go. Shubra asked again, "Dums is still here, what do you want to do with him?" Amon asked in reply, "When the goddess sent you, did she have any instructions?" Shubra replied, "The goddess only ordered that if Dums is found to be trying to harm you, he should be taken down with the entangling vine net and handed to you, but did not say what to do with him. He clearly wanted to kill you just now. Even if you kill him, the goddess's meaning should be for you to do as you see fit." Amon nodded and said, "I understand. Leave this person to me." "Thank you very much." Shubra quietly told Amon the secret of using the entangling vine net, and disappeared with Shera and Taku. They may have gone back to report to Murin, or they may still be secretly protecting Amon not far away. At the edge of the big pit where a fierce battle had just broken out, only Amon and the tied-up Dums were left. Amon kept looking at Dums without saying a word, his eyes almost expressionless. This gaze made Dums' hair stand on end, and he finally could not hold it in any longer and asked with a red face, "What do you want to do with me?" "Let me tell you, I will not beg for mercy." Amon smiled faintly, "I did not ask you to beg for mercy, Dums. Today you wanted to capture me alive, but at the dangerous moment of the fight you used a killing move. Since you want to kill me, you have to consider the possibility of being killed by me. You have nothing to complain about. I just want to ask, is it worth it for you to die in my hands?" This sentence hit Dums' weak spot. He hated Amon on one hand because Peloponnes was trapped in the underworld, and on the other hand, the more important reason was Murin. Amon's success symbolized his failure. Amon standing on the altar holding Murin was a silent mockery to Dums. The arrogant Dums looked down on Amon from the bottom of his heart, but in fact, no matter what he thought, Amon was the most qualified person in the world to mock him. Even if Dums was not afraid of death, dying in the hands of Amon was the least worthy choice, but unfortunately it seemed that there was no other choice. Dums glared and panted, "You can kill me, I have fallen into your hands today anyway, but you have to know the consequences of doing so." Amon shook his head gently, "Consequences? You mean if I kill you, it will lead to the revenge of the gods? I have never provoked you before, and I do not know Bright Moon Night at all, but aren't you going to deal with me today? Whether it is killing me or sending me to the underworld, is there a worse result in the world than this? You are wrong about one thing, the person who should take revenge is me." This was very true. Would Amon let go of the oracle who assassinated him because he was afraid of offending the gods? It was already like this if he did not offend them, so what if he did? Dums was speechless for a moment, and Amon also sensed that a strong fear was gradually rising in his heart. Amon said again, "If I were you, it is not worth dying in my hands. Even if I have to die, I will die in the hands of Queen Kella. Do you understand what I mean?" Dums raised his eyes and stared at Amon hatefully. "You want me to rush into the underworld to fight Queen Kella and rescue Peloponnes? This is a delusion. It is impossible for me to be Kella's opponent in the underworld. It is clearly suicide." Amon sneered, "Then dying is better than dying like this. At least you have done your best, whether the choice is wrong or not. I feel the fear in your heart. You are proud, you look down on those lowly lives, but when your endless life is about to end, your soul is also trembling. Since you know very well that attacking the underworld by force is suicide, and you still can't save Peloponnes, I will give you two choices. The first is to die here, die in my hands. The second is to go back to the underworld in exchange for the goddess Peloponnes. She is innocent and should not bear the suffering for you." Dums hissed, "You actually gave me such a suggestion. What is the difference between dying in the underworld and dying?" Amon, "Of course there is a difference, because you can save Peloponnes. If I were you, I would do so. Think about it, you will die if you don't go anyway. Why not make your life more meaningful? Please make a choice." Dums closed his eyes, the yellow-green rope wrapped around his body trembling. He seemed to be thinking about something and trying to break free. Amon flicked his fingers in the air. A layer of golden light appeared on the rope, firmly binding Dums. Dums opened his eyes and shouted, "I choose to go to the underworld in exchange for Peloponnes. But I know her, it is useless to do so, she will still ask Queen Kella to exchange me, the final result will be the same." Amon nodded, "I have also thought of this. I will personally send you to the underworld, and wait outside the underworld for Peloponnes to come out and have a good talk with her." Dums shouted angrily, "Are you going to tell her that you rescued her from the underworld? Amon, is this how you please women? Seducing Murin is not enough, you even want to please Peloponnes." Chapter 208 191, If I don't go to hell, who will? The reason why I didn't kill you is because of Peloponnes. Your life means nothing to me. God Dums, you should know my origin. I was born in a very humble miner's family in Duk. My life has been hard since I was a child. Even the leftover bread has to be saved for the next meal. I never waste anything. Keeping you alive now is just making use of waste." This was what Amon said on the way to the underworld. Dums was furious, but he could not break free from the binding of the entangling vines. He could only say angrily with red eyes, "You can kill me, but you can't humiliate me like this." Amon said indifferently, "I'm not humiliating you, I'm just telling the truth. If it is a humiliation to you, it only proves that you are pathetic. Suffering in the underworld may be an opportunity for you. Otherwise, I'm afraid that your realm will always be the same. No matter how many hundreds of years pass, no matter how strong you become, you will not be able to understand more. You have passed the test of endless life and death, which is very lucky and amazing. In that test, did you witness the countless creatures in the world? I think all you can do is to look on coldly without thinking, but you have not thought of or even confirmed another possibility, that those creatures are yourself, your past life and future life. You have protected your soul, but still do not understand the meaning of the test. You are so lucky that your luck ends here. Dums was a little confused by his words. After a while, he shouted, "What do you mean? Do you want to guide me?" "The one who guides me is Ea, the god of wisdom." Amon replied coldly, "Unfortunately, his wisdom is not your wisdom. You have reached the place where you should go." Then he shook his hand, put away the entangling vines that bound Dums, and threw him directly from the clouds. At this time, they were already standing on a desolate plateau. There was no green color around them. The ground was covered with rough rocks, and the shrubs were low and sparse. Occasionally, traces of snow could be seen. There was a long, narrow, and deep valley below, like a crack on the plateau created by an invisible giant axe. On both sides of the crack were steep cliffs that extended all the way to the depths of the earth, filled with an inexplicable gloomy atmosphere. Amon threw Dums into the valley. At the end of the valley was the door to the underworld. Amon had been there once before. He did not want to be too close to the mansion of the dead, so he found a hill nearby to take shelter from the wind and sat down to wait quietly. As he waited for the goddess Peloponnes to come out, he looked at the eerie entrance to the mansion of the dead thoughtfully. This matter seemed a little unimaginable, and people might find it hard to understand. Amon also knew that Murin was not willing to go to Kella at first, but she reluctantly agreed at Amon's request. She had to satisfy Amon's wish before Amon would give her a promise. The reason why Queen Kella was angry and wanted to detain Amon was that after Amon entered the underworld, he did not only see his father, but also awakened the souls of the Dushians and released them inexplicably. Kella wanted Murin to exchange another person for Amon, and specifically emphasized that it was the man she had loved. This was done to humiliate Murin because of her famous curse, but it also had a purpose. Amon did not understand at first, but now he understood why. The men Murin had loved in the past had all achieved the 9th level, which meant that Kella needed a demigod to serve in the underworld. The underworld was a very special place, with the characteristics of both divine palaces and divine realms, but not quite the same as other divine palaces or divine realms. Amon already had the field of divine power, which could absorb the power to repair the soul from people's prayers and sacrifices, and the underworld was even more special. It imprisoned the undead in a space similar to a divine palace, and the desires of these undead were prayers to the god of the underworld. Amon had seen Professor Osiris's Book of the Dead in Bastet's spiritual imprint, which recorded the magic of the undead, and from it one could also see the structure of the underworld. Although the underworld of Osiris was not exactly the same as the underworld of Kella, the mysteries were generally the same. The underworld was a strange spatial formation, drawing on a very unique elemental energy, but just like a house, it also needed someone to take care of it, and this kind of work must be done by someone who had achieved the 9th level or above. Neti, the gatekeeper of the underworld, should have achieved the 9th level, and Queen Kella herself was a god who had transcended eternal life, but why not have someone else do this kind of hard labor? Dums was sent here by Murin, which was exactly what Kella needed. Peloponnes was willing to replace Dums, and Queen Kella would also agree. The underworld was dark, only endless darkness and gloom, and living in it was worse than dying. Working here was more miserable than any kind of hard labor in the world. Just as Amon was thinking about this, he suddenly had a thought and looked towards the opposite side. Across the valley, on the top of the opposite mountain peak, in the bitterest cold wind, a man sat quietly, his clothes not fluttering, calm and silent. It was Xidigarba Amon, whom he had seen in the desert. As soon as Amon looked up, he heard Xidigarba's voice. "We meet again. I just saw you throw a man down." Amon replied, "Xidigarba Amon, why are you here?" Great compassion. Xidigarba said, "Boundless light has crossed the 10 directions of suffering. I followed the Buddha from the underworld of Osiris and came to this place to observe. I wish to use my beard to transform the netherworld and lead the dead into the realm of Baron Een to know what reincarnation is. Now that the vow has been made, the Buddha has given me the name of Ksitigarbha Aman. Aman was stunned. The vow has been made, then why are you still sitting here? Ksitigarbha Aman smiled. I showed up and talked to you, and then I left to open the underworld. Aman frowned and pointed to the deep valley in front of him. You also want to build such an underworld? Although I'm not a god, I know more or less about the mystery behind it. This is a way to continue to practice and verify after transcending eternal life, but I don't like it. You can do something else, why do you have to be the king of hell? Ksitigarbha Aman clasped his hands and replied, I don't like it either, I just feel sad when I see this place. Without this trip, I wouldn't have the opportunity to fulfill my vow. Aman narrowed his eyes and asked with interest, then did you go in? Ksitigarbha Aman replied, the owner of this place, Kela, is very arrogant and ordered me to come back after I die. However, I have transcended life and death and achieved an immortal body, so I can't go in. Aman shook his head and said, if you don't want to go in, then don't go in. I have been there, and it is not a good place. Ksitigarbha Aman nodded across the deep valley and said, I would like to hear the details, please enlighten me. Aman was slightly taken aback and sat for a while without answering, as if he was quietly experiencing something. Judging by the gods that Aman had seen, this Ksitigarbha Aman should have already transcended the realm of eternal life, but he used another way to express it, and the belief that he pursued should be different. At this moment, he asked Aman for advice, and at the same time, he taught Aman a spell. Of course, the two of them were not shouting at the top of their lungs in the cold wind across the valley, but they were communicating directly in their souls. According to Aman's experience, this was a high level of information sensing and detection magic. Ksitigarbha Aman's method was slightly different, but the effect was the same. It was not some magic, but a kind of thought that contained all kinds of information in the soul. Resonance was directly imprinted into the mind, as if time was frozen and the non-existent space was opened up to evolve things. Aman could not yet be as brilliant as him, but this method was easy to understand. Ksitigarbha Aman did not ask for help in vain, and when he opened his mouth, he demonstrated this special spell. As long as Aman mastered the key to it, it was not complicated to use it. Aman nodded to Ksitigarbha Aman from afar and said, this place is the underworld of the Anunnaki divine clan. It seems invisible, but it is tangible. It is isolated from the world by a formation, and there are 7 layers of space in total. The first layer is the void without beginning and end, and the 5 senses are useless. The second layer is the manifestation of desire, which is the prayer of the world to the god of the underworld. The third layer is the diffraction of desire, reflecting all kinds of ripples in the mind. The fourth layer is the life of the deceased, either resentful or regretful. The fifth layer is the flashback of the soul, seeing all kinds of things, as if reliving life. Everything is clear but helpless. The sixth layer is the lonely nothingness, without beginning and end. If the desire of the dead is not appeased, it will be difficult to escape. The seventh layer is the residence of the king of the underworld, where the throne of Kela is located. After answering Ksitigarbha's question, he used the mental evolution technique that he had just comprehended to directly transform his experience in the underworld into a spacetime mental image. Only in this way could he explain it clearly. Otherwise, it would be indescribable no matter what language he used. Aman finally said, "This underworld imprisons the souls of the dead, so that people do not know that they are dead, immersed in this life and unable to free themselves, and with the power of the formation, it becomes the divine realm of the king of the underworld. I am very disgusted and even hate this place, because after my people died, their souls were imprisoned in it. Did you see me throw a person down just now? The cause and effect are all because of this. I have long wanted to tear this place down. I don't think you are an evil god, why bother to build such a damn thing?" Aman told Ksitigarbha Aman about his release of the souls of the Dushans and the subsequent series of disputes. This was a kind of verification, exchange, and mutual admonition between the two great achievers, and there was no selfishness to speak of. Ksitigarbha Aman nodded repeatedly and said, Aman, you have already torn down this underworld in your heart. Whether you succeed or not in your cultivation in this life, you will not enter this underworld. What I want to build is not the same as what you see, not a divine palace, not a divine realm, but a world developed by the soul platform. According to what you said, it is the unfolding of my soul. It can't imprison anyone, but it allows the dead to witness what they have been trapped in for a lifetime. When they enter the barren bright realm at the end of their lives, everything they have done in their lives is clear. What others have experienced is reflected in their hearts, from this life to the heart of remorse and the heart of reincarnation. What is reincarnation? What you have done and what you have experienced in the world are clear, but you still cannot free yourself, that is reincarnation. The so-called underworld is nothing more than this. After Ksitigarbha Aman finished these words, his figure disappeared out of thin air, but his mind seemed to be still in place. Through this mind, Aman glimpsed another world, not the time or space that once existed in this world, nor the divine palace or divine realm that Aman had seen. He saw all kinds of scenes, including the flashes of countless people at the moment of their death. All the experiences of their lives, from the birth canal of their mother, were incomparably clear. Aman had seen a similar scene in the underworld, but when his mind continued to go deeper, there were many subtle changes. The existence that a person could not encourage. The so-called living beings must first have self-awareness, be able to distinguish between the subject and the object, and know that they are interdependent with the surrounding world. When the life experience was clear, the impact of their actions on the world was all clearly reflected. These were the traces left in this world by the dead in this life, such as the love, hate, sorrow, and joy that they brought to others, at this moment, all turned into their own feelings. This thought only lasted for a moment, and then the soul would dissipate and go somewhere unknown. But if this moment was not freed, it would be like an endless eternity without beginning and end. People gave birth to the heart of injustice, the heart of remorse, and the heart of reincarnation. There were too many unsatisfied desires and regrets in people's lives, and there were too many injustices in the world. Whether people were good or evil, they all had the heart of injustice, followed by the heart of remorse. A very natural thought would arise: I have understood all this. If I were reborn again, what would I do, and what would I do? The thought of rebirth in this world was the cause of the endless fate of hell. There was also the endless heart of reflection and the heart of injustice. The heart of injustice alternated with the heart of remorse, and the endless suffering never stopped. Before Ksitigarbha disappeared, Ksitigarbha explained a concept to Aman, and Aman himself also understood it, just like what he said before throwing Dums into the underworld, but from a different perspective. In this world, the souls of the dead had to face the torture of fate, the judgment of the end of days. In the alternating heart of injustice and remorse, if they could not be freed, they would be reincarnated. If a soul was freed in such a world, it meant that it would directly become a god who transcended eternal life. But if they had such achievements, how could they fall into this world? The dead witnessed what was trapped, gave birth to the wonderful heart of reincarnation, and dissipated in a flash. This was the world evolved by the soul of Ksitigarbha. When did it appear? Just now, when he said the last word to Aman, it happened in the blink of an eye. Aman's mind could not go deep into the end of this world. He could not follow those souls to see where they went. He only heard the voice of Ksitigarbha again: if I don't go to hell, who will go to hell? Thanks to today's opportunity, I have obtained this achievement, thank you. Everything disappeared, and it was as if Ksitigarbha had never come. Aman was deeply shocked. He understood that this person had broken through a great achievement in front of him, a higher achievement than the gods who transcended eternal life. He could feel it but could not confirm it. He sat there in silence for a long time, looking down at the gloomy valley and murmured, I built the Garden of Eden in the human world. If one day I become a god who transcends eternal life, not only will I see the heaven that I yearn for, but I will also evolve the hell that people choose. Where does the path of the Garden of Eden lead to? This is the test of life. Who do you want to interrogate? I voluntarily exchanged Dums for the underworld, why do you have to do this? Don't think that you are saving me, I will not be grateful if you go against my will. Suddenly, a woman's voice was heard. The voice was clear and sweet, but with a clear sense of rebuke. The goddess Jeshtanana floated out of the valley and flew into the air. She was still the same, barefoot, wearing a light white gauze dress and a wreath of branches on her head, but the 5-petaled rose on the wreath looked haggard and withered. Obviously, her days in the underworld were not easy. Aman stood up and replied, "I don't need your gratitude, I just want to send Dums to where he should go." At the same time, he used the technique he had just comprehended to evolve the cause and effect of the matter into a thought, directly imprinting it into Peloponnes's mind, instantly explaining everything. The reproach in Peloponnes's eyes disappeared, and she sighed helplessly, "So that's how it is, thank you for not killing him. But you can't free me by doing this, I have my responsibility, and I will go to the underworld to exchange him. Kala is waiting for me to return, but this time I will make a request of Demuzid that he will not do it again." Aman also sighed, "I didn't kill him because of you, I understand why you did it, but understanding is not the same as agreeing. You are naturally responsible for Dums becoming what he is today. It is you who let him get everything too easily, it is you who made him so proud, and when he can't get it, he will feel injustice and resentment, but the luck you can give him has now come to an end. He is your brother, you love him, but the gods and the world are not obliged to give him anything. Even if you exchange him like this, it will be meaningless. Have you ever thought of letting him bear all that he has to bear? Serving hard labor in the underworld is exactly the experience he needs, not the price you should bear." Peloponnes bowed her head and said, "I am very clear about what you said, but if I really do this, he will never have a chance to be free. I can't just watch him be trapped in the underworld and suffer endless suffering, not to mention that you've already pointed out my mistake." Aman looked at Peloponnes, his expression became very soft, and gradually revealed a smile. "I am very clear that if you leave Dums in the underworld and leave on your own, I am afraid you will never have peace of mind. Can I give you a suggestion? It may be the path to liberation. You should know that I come from Igut, and this suggestion is a myth that has been passed down in Igut." Peloponnes floated down opposite Aman, raised her eyes and asked, "Before you became a god, your tone was like that of a god, and today you speak as if you are the god of the gods. What advice can you give me, Dums, and Kela?" Aman replied unhurriedly, "The father of the gods in Igut's Ennead is called Ra. Coincidentally, Ra is also one of the titles my father gave me, meaning day and night, symbolizing a kind of reincarnation. Legend has it that Ra experiences the suffering of the world in the night, and brings light and hope to people in the day. If you must exchange for Dums, no one can stop you, but you should understand what I mean, let him suffer and then feel the light and hope. The hard labor in the underworld is not endless, and the joy in the sun is not eternal. If one day he or you can become a god who transcends eternal life, the underworld will no longer be able to bind him. If not, what is the meaning of all that you have guided and given him when the judgment of fate truly arrives?" About the underworld of Ksitigarbha, the description of this book is quite brief, only explaining the origin. But in the 241st chapter of my other book, Holy Mountain, I try to deconstruct the meaning of the underworld and the legendary 18 levels of hell in detail. That description is one of the best that my writing can achieve so far. If there are any readers who are interested, you can refer to the 241st chapter of Holy Mountain. Chapter 209. 192, Garden of Eden. Peloponnes looked at Aman, her eyes sparkling, and she suddenly opened her arms. Aman smiled and opened his arms very calmly, giving the goddess a gentle hug. Peloponnes whispered, "Thank you for your advice, I am good at summoning the power of the living to awaken. The day and night you mentioned are the 4 seasons that I have experienced. I will go to Queen Kela now." Aman advised again, "Why are you in such a hurry? It is midsummer now, you can wait until midwinter to go. In such a cycle, there will always be people who bear it, there will always be people who are free, there will always be hardships, and there will always be hope." Peloponnes raised her head and said, "I know what to do, but how can I thank you?" As she spoke, the roses on her corolla returned to their delicate color, revealing their tender stamens in the cold wind. Aman patted her on the shoulder and said with a smile, "If you are willing, I would like to ask you a small favor." I heard that the divine palace of Ea is the most beautiful of all the palaces of the gods in Anunnaki, and it was you who helped Ea build it. I am thinking of building a Garden of Eden, and everything in the garden will be built by the disciples, but the spatial magic circle that is isolated from the world can only be set up by those who have reached the 9th level. Can you lend me a hand? Peloponnes smiled. The boundary of the divine palace is a stable magical space that can operate on its own. In fact, 9th level mages can also do this, as long as they are told the principles and mysteries. But 9th level mages like you and me are more suitable, and this is what I am best at. You can go to your Garden of Eden for the next 6 months. I know that the location of the divine palace is the secret of every god. Don't worry, I will not tell it to others, especially not to Dums. Moses followed Amon's instructions to the Garden of Eden, and met up with Link and Medanzo. Gabriel, John, and Mizphi were also there. Now that the affairs of Salem were taken care of by Aesop and George, and everything was in order, Amon ordered his disciples to go to the Garden of Eden, which was far away from human habitation, to concentrate on their training. The so-called Garden of Eden did not exist at this time, and the address Amon chose was where Link's original caveman tribe was. It was located on a steep mountain in the valley of Euphrates, a good place for seclusion and cultivation. The cavemen had long since moved to the city of Salem, but the village houses and the caves on the cliffs were still there, and they could be temporarily settled in after a little cleaning. Amon gave Moses a taroculus, which recorded the blueprint of the Garden of Eden. The range was very wide. Not only did it include the original village of the cavemen tribe, but the eastern boundary also included the pool where Elmar used to live outside the village. The farthest point in the west was actually connected to the mountain cave where Bear was last hiding. In other words, the Garden of Eden spanned 2 high mountains, with one in the middle being in the air, and one needed the ability to fly in order to traverse the entire divine palace. There were water sources and even mines in the Garden of Eden, and there were 4 streams surrounding it. The residences of the disciples were scattered among these streams and mountains, and they could build the divine palace according to what they liked. The huge cave where Bear was last hiding was surrounded by white clouds, and could only be entered by stepping on clouds. It was a place for training that Amon had prepared for himself, and it could also be regarded as a remembrance of his past experiences. If the Garden of Eden was to be completely built according to this blueprint, it would take many years, but Amon was not in a hurry. He would first let it take shape, and then let the disciples build it over the long years. This paradise on earth from which one could glimpse the divine kingdom was, for Moses, the home of his soul, and the blueprint given by Amon did not include every detail. The first and most important step was to set up a spatial magic circle, using the natural elemental power between heaven and earth to make this space disappear from the world, beyond people's perception. First of all, there had to be such an outline, and then the various wonders of the Garden of Eden could be built, and this step would require a 9th-level divine emissary or a 9th-level mage. Many of the landscapes in the Garden of Eden were also quite interesting, such as the cold spring that Amon had instructed Moses to build, in the mountains in the west of the Garden of Eden, exactly the same as the cold spring that Crazy Ol had laid in the charcoal forest, and this was also a kind of silent memorial. Link and the others were a little worried when they heard that Dums had gone to find trouble with Amon. It had been 2 days since Moses arrived in the Garden of Eden. If Amon and Dums had a conflict, there should have been a result long ago. These disciples were thinking about going together to see what was going on, but they did not know where to find Amon. At this moment, Murin's elf maid, Shubra, came and told them not to worry, that Murin had sent people to help Amon take down Dums, and the disciples could just wait here. Even though they were mentally prepared, when the disciples saw Amon, they were so shocked that they were almost speechless. Especially Link, the more surprised he was, the wider his mouth opened, so wide that an egg could be stuffed in, making people worry whether his jaw would be dislocated. Everyone knew that Dums was Murin's ex-husband, and there was a reason why Dums had gone to find trouble with Amon. And when Amon came out of Murin's palace, not only did he get rid of Dums, but he also brought Dums' sister, Peloponnes, to the Garden of Eden. Looking at the two, they seemed to have a good relationship. Although the disciples did not say anything, they could not help but speculate in their hearts. Did Ammon use some trick to win Peloponnes's favor again? This was too amazing, even more amazing than the gods. Yes, as expected of Ammonius. When Ammon came to the Garden of Eden, he didn't say too much nonsense. He directly told the disciples that from now on, they would build their own divine palaces. According to the blueprint, they would first build the outer magic circle and listen to the instructions of the goddess Geshtinana. Then he went to the mountain with the huge hollow in the belly of the mountain to train behind closed doors. Unless there was an emergency, no one was to disturb him. Before Ammon arrived, the disciples had already cleaned up the hollow in the belly of the mountain. Although they had not yet carried out careful construction, the environment was very peaceful. Medanzo accompanied Ammon into the hermitage. When there was no one else around, he winked and asked, "Oh, Ammonius, you are a god. Everyone says that Dum's ex-wife, Murin, abandoned Dum's for you. Now, you have even abducted Dum's sister. Aren't you afraid that Murin will be jealous?" Ammon punched him. "What nonsense are you talking about? It's not what you think. My relationship with Murin is not what people think." Under the command of Peloponnes, the disciples began to build the divine space of the Garden of Eden, similar to the construction of courtyard walls in a garden on earth. Gabriel's status here was very special. She was not Ammon's disciple, and was still Ammon's prisoner of war. But everyone treated her as a guest in the Garden of Eden, and Gabriel also helped build the divine palace. 10 days later, Elmar also brought Raphael, so there was another guest in the Garden of Eden. Ammon had accepted a private request from Goliath and had long had the intention to guide Raphael, but in such an indirect way, he made him learn on his own. Why did Ammon want to train in seclusion? He needed such a period of undisturbed peace too much. Over the years, his power had grown stronger and stronger, and his achievements had grown higher and higher, but he had encountered one thing after another. People can grow through experience, but they must also mature through reflection. After the completion of the shrine in the city of Salem, Ammon had not had time to carefully experience the subtle mysteries of the divine realm. Any other god, after having such a divine realm for the first time, would have spent many years in seclusion to consolidate the realm and feel the gains, but Ammon had been busy all this time. With Ammon's achievements today, he could already be called a god on earth, and he had to seek the meaning of this god and comprehend the seemingly endless life from the endless power that could repair the soul. In fact, at this level of training, there were many things that no longer needed to be rushed or even cared about. When Ammon calmed down and immersed himself in the spiritual world, he had a new feeling that was different from before. When the form of your existence changes, your understanding of life will also change. When death was no longer an urgent threat for decades, people were not willing to experience the dangers of the world for no reason, and only wanted to live a leisurely and comfortable life, such as Peloponnes had spent hundreds of years like this. Of course, in their hearts, they were not willing to fight mortals to the death. Although they had great power, if they encountered great achievers on earth, they would still be hurt, and it was not worth it. People may die with another warrior on the battlefield, but no warrior would be willing to fight a rat in the forest. The metaphor may not be appropriate, but the mentality of the reaction was true. When the gods heard the prayers and petitions in the shrine and sent emissaries to assist the believers in carrying out their tasks, those emissaries often assisted in secret, striking at critical moments, and would not directly charge forward unless it was necessary. The emissaries sent by Seth, such as Hecate, only used various means to stop the footsteps of Moses and the others, and did not directly fight with Link or Medanzo. After all, there were not many emissaries like Batet who often killed demons, and Bastet's power was second only to the gods who had truly transcended eternal life in the Ennead. When Ammon trained in the Garden of Eden, he needed to integrate all his previous experiences and everything he had learned, calmly reflect on the gains and losses, and consider the new meaning of existence as life changed. Although he was far away in the Garden of Eden, he was well aware of what was happening in the city of Salem. What he focused on training was the incarnation on the altar, where he could clearly hear the prayers of people, and through the prayers, he could also find out the true emotions in people's hearts. As long as he was willing, he could learn about the situation in the city of Salem from the altar, and if he was unwilling, he would not be disturbed. The gods could indeed hear the prayers of the believers, but sometimes they did not listen or did not bother to pay attention. For example, when neighbors quarreled, someone came to pray for Ammonius to make his neighbor sick, or when a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law did not get along, a wife came to pray for Ammonius to make her husband stronger and not be so weak at the mercy of her mother-in-law. Ammon pretended not to hear these prayers, and after listening to them for a long time, he could only smile bitterly, and then he simply stopped listening. But the thoughts of the people on earth were indeed a kind of power, and when you could listen and feel it, it was as if your own soul contained countless souls, making the soul stronger and able to continuously repair itself when it was injured. Ammon's current status was equivalent to that of the main god of the city alongside Murin in the city of Salem, a position that other divine emissaries and even some gods did not enjoy, and many divine emissaries envied him. Ammon had turned into 2 faces and 4 arms in the battle against Dums and Bright Moon Night, but he was not proficient in using it at the time, and now that he had a clear understanding of it in training, he had completely mastered this method. This kind of training could be long relative to the time on Earth, and if there was no particularly urgent matter, people might not see Ammon for many years. But Ammon also had many urgent matters at the moment, such as the completion of the construction of the divine space in the Garden of Eden as soon as possible. According to Ammon's speculation, the disciples of Madanzo, Link, and John would soon face the test of losing their power, and they would need to spend it in the Garden of Eden. Peloponnesus lived in the Garden of Eden for half a year, from midsummer to midwinter. In this half a year, she had basically completed the outline of the spatial magic formation, and the space above the mountains of the Euphrates River disappeared from the world, and people could no longer see it. But this spatial magic formation still needed to be strengthened to protect the Garden of Eden from the outside world, and it could only be built slowly in the coming years. 8 years later, Peloponnesus left the Garden of Eden for the underworld of the Anunnaki divine clan and exchanged Dums. She made an agreement with Kella that they would exchange once every 6 months, and she and Dums would take turns to serve in the underworld. As Ammon said, the suffering in the underworld was not endless, and the joy in the sun was not eternal. There was always relief in the darkness, and one had to learn to cherish the sunshine. Many years later, there was a legend in the world that the alternation of spring, summer, autumn, and winter was a symbol of the 2 gods taking turns to come to the world. That was something that would happen a long time later. Peloponnesus did not see Ammon when she left the Garden of Eden, and at that time the war between the city of Salem and the city of Enlil had already begun. At this time, except for Moses, all the disciples of Ammon had left the Garden of Eden, and even Murin and her divine emissaries had left the palace of Murin, and everyone was looking for Ammon all over the continent. Why did Ammon disappear? Why were people anxiously searching everywhere? It all started with a battle on the plains of Duk. If nothing unexpected happened, Ammon would also have meditated in seclusion for 100 years like the legendary gods. After all, there were still many things to worry about in this world, but he would not leave the Garden of Eden for at least several years. But it was a pity that the wind would not stop. After only a month of training in the mountains, Ammon, who was immersed in the spiritual world, suddenly had a faint feeling, as if there was a voice calling him, praying to him and asking for help. This kind of prayer was not something that Ammon did not want to ignore, and what was more surprising was that the prayer did not come from the shrine in the city of Salem. The prayer was calling the name of Allah, and it should be that Joshua and the others were in trouble. If Ammon had not cultivated into the incarnation of Ammonius and Allah at the same time, he would not have been able to hear this kind of prayer, and even if he could hear it now, the perception was very weak and could not be clearly understood. The people of the town of Duk were still on the way, and they took the golden plate left by Moses with them, and when they set up camp, they placed the golden plate with the 10 covenants written on it in the big tent, using it as a mobile shrine. Since Allah forbade them to build statues, they wanted to pray to the golden plate, and it was this prayer that Ammon sensed. After Moses left, the people, led by Joshua, passed through the city of Marduk and entered the plains of Duk. They could not walk very fast on foot, and it would take them another month to reach the city of Salem. With the 12 judges in the group, walking along the paths trodden by the caravans in the wilderness. The bandits and beasts that might appear would not pose a threat. Just as they were about to reach the city of Salem, the governor of Aesop sent a small group of soldiers to meet them. The captain told Joshua that the city of Salem was only 2 days away, but the situation had not been peaceful recently, and the governor of Aesop was afraid of accidents, so he sent people to escort them. There was a new friction between the city of Salem and the city of Enlil, and the signs were not right. According to the previous agreement between Aesop and the city of Enlil, the mines at the foot of the Assyrian plateau were owned by the people of the town of Duk, but Enlil was allowed to send highlanders to mine iron ore and parangons, with half of the harvest as their reward, and the two sides were at peace for a while. But as a steady stream of people from Enlil gathered across the plateau, they sent someone to the city of Salem to make 2 new requests. The first was to buy daily necessities from the city of Salem, because many of their supplies still needed to be transported across the plateau, and it was obviously easier to buy them here in Salem. The city of Salem was founded earlier, and the surrounding land had already been reclaimed, sown, and harvested for 2 seasons, and there were also many handicraft workshops in the city, and its products were much richer than those of Enlil. But of course, Aesop was unwilling, because the supplies that Enlil wanted to buy were exactly what Salem lacked, and they also had to replenish their supplies from the outside world through the trade routes that they had painstakingly opened, so this time the negotiations fell through. Immediately after that, Enlil made a second request, that since their people were mining the mines, then the mines should belong to Enlil, and they would no longer hand over half of the fine iron and parangons. The reason was simple: the people of Duk were all dead long ago, and it was a land without an owner, and it was the gods who guided them to occupy it. Aesop told the other party very clearly that the people of Duk were still there, and they had the legal right to inherit it. Enlil, on the other hand, gave a deadline of 1 month, and if they did not see the people of Duk within a month, they would completely occupy the mines. Aesop realized that a real conflict would be inevitable, and stepped up the training of the city's army to set up defenses in various positions. Chapter 210. 193, David goes to battle. These warriors were all Highlander giants, good at trekking in deep mountains and dense forests, and with 2 mages leading the way, they avoided the scouts sent by Salem and entered the hinterland of the plains of Duk. The undeveloped area of the plains of Duk was large, and many places were still overgrown with trees, and it would be difficult for more than 100 people to find them. Someone leaked the news, but this team actually knew the exact route and time of Joshua and the others' advance. The guards escorted Joshua and the others through the wilderness, and that evening, they had just set up camp, set up their big tents, and put up their gold plates. While they were praying before dinner, a group of Highlander giants suddenly jumped out of the dense forest in a military formation with swords and spears. These men were burly and ferocious, and the weapons in their hands were heavy and sharp. One of them shouted, "Where are the miners of Duk? Come out and come back with me, and you can still live." The captain from Salem broke out in a cold sweat. Well-trained Highlander giants had always been terrifying warriors on the battlefield, and the people opposite were obviously not explorers or ordinary bandits of the wilderness. Looking at their standing posture and formation, they were definitely soldiers who had undergone regular training, and the combat power exerted by such a formation was far from what a motley crew could compare to. The enemy was dressed as hunters and had gathered hundreds of people, while this captain only had 12 soldiers under his command, and it was impossible for him to be a match. What was even more terrifying was that there were 2 men with staffs in the other party's team. Mages could exert the greatest power in battle when fighting in a military formation, especially a legion of mages who had been specially trained to cooperate. This captain was a member of the Link tribe and had followed Amon to hunt in the mountains. After so many years of training, he was already a 3rd-level warrior, and he was also quite courageous, but he did not panic excessively. With a sullen face and a slightly trembling voice, he whispered to Joshua, "I will gather the soldiers to charge. You take the opportunity to escape, as many of you can escape through the wilderness to Salem, and be sure to report what happened here to Lord Aesop." Joshua said in a deep voice, "It's not impossible to fight." The captain stamped his foot. "Those are Highlander giants, born with infinite strength. Moreover, they are not a wandering tribe, but a trained army. If they don't escape, they will be annihilated. Joshua, they have more people. We can't escape in this wasteland. Othniel, the head of the 12 judges, came over and said, Captain Dirk, gather your team and protect the big tent and the people in it. Leave the soldiers in front to us. Dirk's eyes widened in surprise. You? Otani nodded. Yes, let us take care of it. Goliath was a noble warrior, and it wasn't easy for a Highlander like him to become a noble. He had been living in the kingdom of Assur for 3 generations, and he became a noble because of his grandfather's military exploits. When Goliath came of age, he also joined the giant legion of the Assyrian kingdom and became the personal guard of Felix, the legion commander, and later rose to become the captain of the infantry formation. This time, the giant legion was sent to the south of the Assyrian plateau, and while crossing the desolate and steep mountains, Goliath was full of doubts about His Majesty's orders. Why did he send the kingdom's most elite legion to such a godforsaken place? The logistics of such a difficult march were very difficult, and if it had been an ordinary person, the non-combat casualty rate would have been more than half on the way across the plateau, and only a kingdom could organize such a migration. It was only when he reached the plains of Duk that he understood what it was all for. This fertile land was so vast and waiting for people to reclaim and occupy it. If it was all annexed, it would be equivalent to 1/3 of the arable land of the Assyrian kingdom, and it would be much more productive than elsewhere. But there was already the city of Salem in front of them, blocking their way forward. Commander Felix led the vanguard troops to build a stronghold at the foot of the mountain, and with the arrival of a steady stream of follow-up troops, the city of Enril was built. If the city of Enril was completed in the future, as far as they could control the area, it would not be a problem to accommodate nearly 100,000 people. But the Assyrian kingdom sent its most elite legion over the plateau to come here, and the purpose was certainly not just to establish such a foreign city. The cultivated fields would not be harvested until after autumn, and the first treasure they found after arriving on the plains of Duk was the mine of the Dushians, which had the best fine iron and Parangan mines on the continent, both of which were strategic materials urgently needed by the Assyrian kingdom. The first conflict with the city of Salem occurred during the fight for the mine. At that time, the city of Enril was not yet stable, and Salem also needed time to develop, so the negotiations were successful for the time being. Now that the city of Enril was getting bigger and bigger, and more people were arriving, if all supplies had to be transported through the Assyrian plateau, the logistics had reached its limit, and it was impossible to station more troops. At this time, they had to advance south, and the first thing they had to do was to conquer the city of Salem. Occupying the mine was only the first step to starting the war, and it was also a test of the strength of Salem. In fact, there were many places at the foot of the southern mountains of the Assyrian plateau that produced fine iron, but the Duk mine, which had already been explored and mined, was the richest of them all, and it would save a lot of manpower and would not have to re-explore and re-excavate. More importantly, that place was also the place with the most concentrated production of parangons on the continent, so they had to get it first no matter what. The Duk miners, who were familiar with the distribution of the veins, good at smelting fine iron, and able to collect parangons, were also an asset. They had mastered the skills passed down from generation to generation, and on the other hand, the millennia of bloodline precipitation made this clan better at learning the skills. Even if they taught the Duk mining skills to others, they would always be a little lacking, and only a few people could use them as skillfully as the Duk miners. Felix was guided by the gods to know that the surviving Duk miners were about to reach the city of Salem, and as they were the owners of that mine, they must not fall into the hands of Aesop. It was best to capture the most capable miners and bring them to Enril, and if that did not work, kill them, so he sent Goliath to be in charge of the operation. Goliath was responsible for directing the craftsmen in Enril, and life in the mine was of course much harder than in the city, and the daily work was boring and monotonous. He was a warrior, eager to kill on the battlefield to establish merit, and although his giant warriors were powerful, they could not work as coolies in the main mine. After receiving the order from the governor of Felix, he was very happy to command the soldiers into the jungle, and the war he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Although the secret march through the jungle was difficult and dangerous, it felt much more exciting than in the mine, and along the way, there were gods secretly pointing out the route they should take and the time to reach where they should be. Sure enough, they stopped the miners of Duk. They were dressed in rags and had just set up camp. They were praying in front of a gorgeous tent. There were only a dozen armored cavalrymen around them, their horses tied to the trees next to them. Goliath felt that he was a man blessed by the gods, and he seemed to have seen the result of this battle, killing all the enemy soldiers, women and children, and bringing the strongest miners back to Enrol. After the victory of the war in the future, he would also be able to obtain a territory in this new rich territory by virtue of his merits, and become a great noble with a famous title. Goliath took his men and formed a formation in front of the call, waiting for the other party to surrender. The dozen or so soldiers mounted their horses, but did not dare to charge into battle, but surrounded the tent in the camp. There were still people praying in the tent. Were they praying to the gods? Goliath was surprised to see the ragged miners stand up again, holding machetes, sledgehammers, clubs, and other miscellaneous weapons, and walk out of the camp in formation. Walking in front were 12 people, all holding branch-shaped iron staffs, which were iron embryos that had not been fully forged, and behind them were more than 30 strong men. Goliath couldn't help but want to laugh. These people were wearing ragged clothes and holding ragged weapons. Were they going out to beat dogs or to beg for food? Were they all crazy, actually wanting to fight my giant warriors? Goliath's team had 2 priests, and he himself was very strong, far stronger than the average advanced warrior, so he thought that he could kill all these people by himself. Of course, he could not kill them all, most of them had to be taken back as prisoners of war, so Goliath was ready to show his strength and shock these ungrateful miners, so that they would know his power and surrender obediently. With a huge long sword in his hand, he walked to the open ground with a sneer, pointed to the opposite side and said, "You sinners, put down your weapons and come back with me. I promise to treat the useful miners as kindly as possible. If you try to resist, only death awaits you." As he spoke, he waved the heavy long sword in his hand twice in the air, and the terrifying giant sword with a faint light made a shrill sound as it cut through the air, but in the hands of this giant, it was as easy as waving a feather. Othniel, who was opposite Goliath, shouted with an expressionless face, "You're already dead." The Duk miners had experienced too much suffering, and when they were about to reach their hometown, they encountered an enemy again. For the first time, they would have a head-on confrontation, and their anger finally could not be suppressed. There were more than 60 people in total, more than 40 of them were young and strong miners, and their fighting strength was no less than that of the Highland giants, especially the 12 judges who practiced the power of 2 sides and had all achieved the advanced level, so they were not afraid of this battle at all. They had not shown their strength yet. Goliath, on the other hand, did not know that he was facing 12 advanced mages who had mastered advanced body arts at the same time. In a regular battle formation, no mage would walk in front of a warrior. He was already ready to stride forward, swing his giant sword, and first cut a few people in half, and then use the light of the sword to sweep the rest of the people away. It was estimated that the miners behind him would collapse without a fight. However, at the moment when Goliath swung his sword and Othniel shouted coldly, no one expected a child to suddenly rush out from the miners and shout, "My divine general, show his power." Before his voice died away, he flicked a flat round stone from the leather bag on his shoulder. The child was David Solomon, whom Othniel had left in the big tent. There were also a dozen non-combatants in the Duk tribe, such as the maidservants of Joshua and Moses, and the youngest David. When Othniel led the miners steadily towards the enemy, David suddenly rushed out of the crowd. Othniel hurriedly shouted, "David, come back." But David had already made his move. Of course, Goliath saw David, and of course, the soldiers dozens of steps behind him also saw him. There was a burst of laughter, and no one took David seriously. David was just a child with a foot-long hunting knife at his waist. He did not even wear leather armor. His weapon was a rubber band with the end wrapped around a stone that could be bounced out. This kind of thing could also kill enemies in combat, but in David's hands, it was like a child's toy. Goliath turned the tip of the knife, wanting to use the thick back of the knife to bounce the stone back with the dexterity of martial arts. He wanted to directly break David's tendons and bones and teach this arrogant child an unforgettable lesson. However, as soon as he turned his wrist and swung the knife, he heard the priest behind him shout, "Captain, be careful." The stone that was bounced out of the rubber band flew in the air, its speed getting slower and slower until it landed. David was more than 20 steps away from Goliath. The stone was about to be hit by Goliath's knife, but suddenly, it strangely accelerated. Goliath only felt his vision blur. The flying stone passed through the knife as if it was passing through the air. Of course, the stone could not pass through the knife. This was a spatial acceleration, a typical advanced auxiliary magic. The two priests sensed the magical fluctuations, but it was too late to warn him. The round stone suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning with white light. Goliath ducked and tried to dodge, but he was too tall, and the white light hit his forehead. With a muffled bang, the stone instantly exploded into pieces. A large part of Goliath's forehead caved in, the knife in his hand fell to the ground, and his huge body fell backward with a loud bang. His forehead was so hard that it was not penetrated by the stone with the energy impact, but it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. David's movements were extremely agile. As he bounced the stone, he had already flown forward, jumped onto Goliath's body in one leap, pulled out his hunting knife, and cut off the huge head with a cold light. The giant soldiers cried out in alarm and had already thrown their spears at him. The two mages raised their staffs high, and a flame fell from mid-air towards the child. The 12 judges were stunned, and immediately raised their iron staffs and rushed over. An icy mist rolled up along with a gust of wind, dispersing the sea of fire in front of David. As if they had discussed it beforehand, the 12 of them threw a stone the size of a goose egg at the same time. The target of the attack was clear, the two priests in the opponent's battle formation. The two priests were also quite unlucky. They had no idea what kind of opponent they were facing. In the battle formations of the continent, they had never seen a mage raise a weapon and launch a melee charge. The 12 judges cast magic at the same time and threw the stones. These stones carried a vibrating buzzing sound and were very powerful. The two priests did not have time to attack and hurriedly turned their staffs, and an earth wall instantly surged in front of them. The warriors on both sides also rushed forward and waved their weapons to block the flying stones. These warriors, disguised as hunters, entered the jungle and did not carry heavy shields. A stone hit the giant warrior's weapon and turned it into powder with a strong shock and tremor, unexpectedly sending the burly giants flying. The first stone smashed the earth wall, and before the priest could cast a spell to repair it, the second stone smashed the earth wall into dust. Then the stone behind passed through the dust and hit the priest who was casting the spell. There was a long scream of pain accompanied by an explosion of blood, and the two priests were killed on the spot. Stone throwing was a game that the miners of Duk played since childhood. The life of a miner was monotonous and there was no entertainment to enjoy. The children would set up a stone stake on the ground and hit it from a distance, competing to see who could hit it more accurately and faster. The one who could knock down the opponent's stone stake first was the winner. The stones they threw could hit extremely accurately and far. And in the hands of the 12 judges, who had mastered the power of two sides, this stone-throwing game that they played since childhood had also become a powerful combat skill. At this time, David had already lifted Goliath's hair and stood on the giant's corpse, raising his head high and shouting, "God grant us victory." The 12 judges led the miners and rushed into the battle formation of the giant warriors, causing the other side to panic and immediately collapse. Many soldiers turned around and ran. The opponents they encountered were too terrifying. A child had killed the powerful leader Goliath with a wave of his hand, and before the battle had even begun, 2 of the priests in the team were killed. The miners, who had been vulnerable in their eyes, now seemed to have become the most terrifying monsters in the world. Once the formation was disrupted and morale was lost, the battle could not be fought. The 12 judges rushed to the front, like tigers entering a flock of sheep. Their iron staffs glowed with dazzling light, and with the explosive impact of energy, the giant warriors in front of them fell to the ground one after another. By the time the miners behind rushed up with sledgehammers and machetes, there was no need to fight anymore. More than 30 of the more than 100 giant warriors had fallen, and the rest fled into the dense forest like frightened birds. Othniel shouted, "Divide into 4 teams, each with 3 judges and 8 miners to search, don't let them go back to inform us. Captain Dirk, you protect the camp. David, where is David?" In just a short while, David had chased the fleeing giant warriors into the dense forest, and Goliath's head was on the chest of the corpse. Othniel ordered again, "Whoever sees David, tell him to come back quickly, it's getting dark, it's dangerous to go into the dense forest alone to chase after the giants." In today's encounter, they had achieved a great victory, and David had made a great contribution. Even the 12 judges did not know that the young David actually had such great abilities. Moses did not hold a power awakening ceremony for him, so who taught him? Chasing after the fleeing giants in the wilderness, the judges used detection magic to search for movement in all directions. In this place full of trees, they could not run far in a panic in the dark. The miners chased in the mountains all night and found nearly 70 giant warriors, more than 20 of whom were beheaded in resistance, and the remaining 30 or so were taken captive. When they pushed the captives back to the camp, David had not returned. Everyone was a little worried. There were still more than 20 giant warriors who had escaped. Would the child be in danger? Chapter 2:11. 194, Confrontation of Divine Emissaries. It was already dawn, and Joshua was about to send someone to find David when he saw David walking out of the jungle with a giant sword and shouting, "I caught 28 of them, knocked them out and left them lying in the woods, should we send someone to drag them all back?" His father rushed forward and hugged David. "How could you have caught so many giant warriors?" David looked up and smiled. "The messengers sent by the gods have been guiding me and telling me where the enemies are hiding." The one who guided David was Medanzo. Ammon vaguely heard the prayers of his people in the Garden of Eden and immediately sent Medanzo to check the situation. Shortly after Medanzo set off, Ammon, who was sitting in the belly of the mountain, suddenly frowned again. Link, who was working with Peloponnes to build a magic spatial formation, heard Ammon's voice again, "I'm a little worried about Medanzo. Link, you go to the plains of Duk too." Medanzo was very fast and arrived at the site of the battle between the miners and the giant soldiers before midnight. By this time the battle had stopped, and the 12 judges were leading the elite miners in search of the fleeing giant warriors in the forest at night. David, who had entered the dense forest alone, was also pursuing the enemy with a machete and detection magic. In this situation, the magic of mages could be seen. In the dark night, in the wilderness overgrown with trees, the giant warriors could not find their way at all, and could not run far even if they wanted to, so they could only hide in a corner and wait for dawn. Mages, on the other hand, could use detection magic to detect the surrounding situation, and their movements would not be affected. Medanzo chose David among so many people because the child was very talented. He not only had the blood of the Duk miners in his veins, but he was also very smart and perceptive. At a young age, he had traveled all over the continent and experienced so many hardships, but he had not lost his spirituality and was always full of courage and fighting spirit. In some ways, this child was even stronger than Ammon back then. Ammon may not have been the best among the Duk teenagers back then, but Crazy Ol had taken a fancy to Ammon. At this time, David was not even 16 years old, but he had already achieved the 5th level of the power of 2 sides. This was quite shocking. Of course, one's achievements could not be completely measured by age. This was only the foundation of the beginning, and it did not represent the height one could reach in the end. For example, Nero, the master of scroll making, became a supreme mage in his early 20s, but he was only a 7th level mage his whole life. Crazy Ol, a genius like him, eventually failed to break through to the 9th level. Metatro found that David had quietly found 3 giant warriors with his hunting knife. In the dark, he went around to their backs and suddenly knocked them out. He did not even make too much noise. He did not fight with the powerful giants who were waving their weapons. He was very happy to see his disciples' achievements today, so he secretly pointed out which giant warriors were hiding nearby to David. David, who was in the dense forest, suddenly heard Madanzo's voice. Along with the voice, a strange scene was directly reflected in his mind, showing the hiding place of the giant warriors, and even their posture was clearly shown. David worked until dawn and finally subdued the last giant warrior. None of Goliath's men had escaped. Only then did he walk out of the jungle and return to the camp. Madanzo watched David walk among the clansmen and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Standing in the crystal shuttle, he stretched his arms in the rising morning light. He flew through the night and immediately searched the dense forest of the wilderness with detection magic. Then he used message magic to transmit the hiding place of the giant warrior and the clear situation directly to David. He was a little tired after being busy for so long. Before he could even stretch his body inexplicably tightened. The cloud-shaped crystal shuttle instantly turned into a cloud of mist. Countless sharp ice crystals condensed out of thin air and pointed in all directions. The powerful magic power was ready to be unleashed. He put down his arm and slowly turned around on the cloud, only to feel the dazzling light of the sunrise. He narrowed his eyes and saw a man burning in flames. The man's whole body was emitting flames, but Madanzo could not see his face clearly because he was standing between Madanzo and the rising sun, and the light of the flames had also turned into a dazzling flying wing. "Who are you?" the man spoke. Hearing his voice, there was an inexplicable tingling feeling of being burned in his mind. Madanzo sensed the man's powerful aura and slowly pulled out the key of destiny, the tip of the long spear shining with golden brilliance, like morning dew evaporating in the sun. He asked coldly, "I was going to ask you the same question, why are you here?" The man replied, "I am Kibir, the fire god of Anunnaki, the emissary of god Enlil." "Who are you?" Madanzo suddenly laughed and even whistled frivolously, curling the corners of his mouth and replied, "Oh, so that's how it is. No wonder those giant warriors happened to intercept the path of the Duk miners in this 1,000 miles of wilderness. It was you who had been secretly guiding them all along." Madanzo had a problem, or rather a characteristic, that the more nervous he was, the more relaxed he would appear on the surface, and the greater the pressure and the more dangerous the situation was, he would instead appear a little sloppy. Facing Kibir, he was not sure he could win, and the aura that the other party released was very powerful. No wonder Goliath was able to lead his team from the Euphrates Valley to the plains of Duk and just happened to find the Duk miners. Felix, the lord of Enlil, sending such a team was probably also guided by this divine emissary Kibir. Gods who transcend eternal life usually do not do this dirty work themselves, and there are some special agreements between the gods. They generally cannot deal with mortals directly, but can send divine emissaries to complete some tasks. Madanzo had dealt with the divine emissaries of the Ennead, and now this Kibir was using a similar method. He guided an army from the city of Enlil to intercept the Duk miners. If there were no accidents, this would have been a perfect surprise attack, but no one expected the Duk miners to be so strong that they actually took out all of Goliath's troops. Kibir watched Goliath arrive at his destination accurately, and then left. His task was completed, and the rest had nothing to do with him. A high and mighty divine emissary usually does not participate in the fighting of the mortal world, as no one can guarantee that they will not encounter any accidents. It might be fine once, but maybe 8 or 10 times, they will encounter trouble. Even if there is only a 1% chance of injury, no one can say for sure that they will be safe and sound after 100 battles. If they were always personally involved in battles, then most of the divine emissaries would have died over the long years. But today's situation was a bit special, and not long after Kibir left, he suddenly noticed that something had happened to the 2 priests around Goliath. When Kibir rushed back to check, Goliath's army had been wiped out, but he found a suspicious person in the sky, probably another divine emissary, so he could not help but show himself. Hearing Madanzo whistling, Kibir said angrily, "Which god's emissary are you? Knowing that I am here on a mission under the orders of the great god Enlil, you still dare to make trouble." Madanzo shook the golden spear in his hand and said with a smile, "Your Excellency seems to be ignorant. Don't you know that this is the territory of the city of Salem? The city of Salem enshrines Ammonius and Murin, and I am the emissary of Ammonius. The mighty god Enlil actually sent you to do this kind of shady business of killing people and robbing their goods. Your mission is over, and those giant warriors have met their end. I'm afraid they did not expect that the gods were guiding them to their deaths." Kibir shouted coldly, "The reason why Goliath died was because he underestimated his enemy and was incompetent. The gods have their own principles, they will give guidance to the world, but they will not do everything for the world. You have also completed your mission, but you should not have humiliated another divine emissary in front of him. As far as I know, Ammon did not join the Anunnaki divine clan, you and I are not emissaries of the same divine clan, and I can kill you." The golden spear in Madanzo's hand no longer swayed, and he held it firmly with both hands, while the crystal shuttle under his feet turned into a huge white flower. He stood on the flower and said in a deep voice, "Want to fight me? Then come on. I have been on the battlefield, fought with the continent's #1 warrior, Enkidu, and witnessed his fall with my own eyes." Kibir suddenly stretched out his hand and pulled out a dazzling ribbon of light out of thin air, which turned into burning flames with a wave forward. The golden light behind him also turned into countless wings of fire, extending forward and sweeping towards Madanzo. Madanzo only felt that he was surrounded by flames from top to bottom, and his opponent could no longer be seen, as he was surrounded by a blazing aura on all sides. The outer petals of the giant white flower formed by the crystal shuttle unfolded, constantly disappearing and melting in the flames, and then constantly growing and stretching to resist the attack of the wings of fire. The inner layer of petals retracted and wrapped around Madanzo's body, turning into an ice crystal-like armor to isolate the blazing aura. He swung the key of fate forward with all his might. A sharp golden light streaked across, and the sky was divided into a bright and dark gap. Kibir's figure appeared in the gap, his face full of surprise. He didn't expect the weapon in Madanzo's hand to be so powerful. He occupied a favorable position, with his back to the rising sun, exerting the greatest power of the wings of fire. He was confident that Madanzo would not be able to fight back and could only struggle to resist. Unexpectedly, the golden spear could cut through the light and darkness, and did not change the power of Kibir's wings of fire. The flames that were cut on both sides became more intense, but in the middle, there was a cooling cut. Kibir hurriedly bowed, and the wings of fire rolled out behind him, tightened around the white flower. He stretched out his hand and pulled from the side, and the red light of the flames condensed into a huge shield. The golden light pierced the shield, and the diffusing golden brilliance exploded. In an instant, magic power surged, and the two could not see each other clearly. In the camp in the distance, Joshua and others were ordering the captured giant warriors to stand in line with their hands tied behind their backs. Suddenly, there was a burst of golden light in the distant sky, brighter than the sun. Everyone was dazzled for a while. When they squinted and looked up, there was no abnormality in the sky except for a white cloud floating gently. Both Madanzo and Kibir hid their figures, and the people on the ground could not see them, but at the moment of the fierce confrontation, they could not help but reveal their traces. The golden light burst, and Madanzo flew backward on the huge white flower. The key of fate was also waved backward, drawing a path in the flames. He wanted to take the opportunity to escape from the other party's wings of fire. At this moment, the pervading hot breath suddenly disappeared. When he looked up again, it was the rising sun opposite him. Kibir had actually left under the cover of the backlight. Madanzo was a little puzzled. They had only fought for one round just now, but it was obvious that Kibir was stronger. The two sides had tested each other's strength as soon as they fought. Why did he suddenly leave when he clearly had the upper hand? Just as he frowned, he saw a shuttle coming from the horizon, and Link's voice shouted from afar, "Madanzo, are you okay? Who did you fight with just now? I was almost roasted." Metatro wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and shouted while gasping for breath, "What burnt? Didn't you see that I beat him away as soon as I made a move?" Link had already flown close and said with a smile, "Look at the crystal shuttle under your feet, the heat has not dissipated yet." It was not you who beat him away, it was obviously because I came, and he was scared away by me. Who is this person, so powerful? If I didn't come, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to hold on alone. Madanzo retorted, "You never forget to brag, the person who fought with him was me. This person is Enrol's divine emissary, the fire god Kibir of Anunnaki." Link gasped, no longer joking, and asked with his mouth wide open, "Kibir?" He and the ash god Nugus are the two great generals under Enrol, and they are not ordinary small fries, and you actually ran into him. If I didn't come, you would have really suffered. How strong is this legendary general? Madanzo replied with lingering fear, "He is definitely stronger than me. I only noticed it when he took up an advantageous position. At that time, he had already charged the power of his wings of fire, and thought that he could take me down with one blow. But he did not expect that I could still fight back, and if he really wanted to kill me, he would have been seriously injured himself." Link patted him on the shoulder. "No wonder Ammonius was worried and specially asked me to come and pick you up, I almost couldn't see you anymore." Madanzo kicked him lightly. "Can't you say something nice? It was the two of us who scared the fire god away together. Sigh, to tell you the truth, if you hadn't come, I would have been ready to run away, and if I really couldn't escape, I would have fought him to the death. This man's wings of fire are really powerful, and standing with his back to the sun is very cool, I'll think about it later." Link comforted him. "It's good that you're okay, the two of us together may not be able to deal with him. He only left because he found that you were not without the power to fight back and was unwilling to fight head-on. Ammonius sent you to see the situation of the Duk miners, how is it going over there?" Madanzo pointed to the path in the distance. It was scary but not dangerous. The city of Enrol sent an army of giants to intercept and kill them, and the escorting guards of Salem were no match, but the 12 judges and David took care of them all, and are now preparing to take the captives on their way. Link nodded. "Ammonius is really wise, let's also follow behind and watch quietly, they will be safe once they reach Salem." Link put away the wind-riding shuttle and jumped onto the crystal shuttle, and Madanzo controlled the white cloud to float in the direction of Salem, but suddenly his figure swayed, and the cloud under his feet almost scattered. Link helped him in time, and the white cloud asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you, are you hurt?" Madanzo grabbed Link's arm and replied in some horror, "No, I'm not hurt, maybe I used too much magic in that fight just now, I suddenly feel very weak." "That's not right, I shouldn't be so weak." Link looked at Madanzo and suddenly thought of something, and a look of envy appeared in his eyes. "It turns out that Ammonius called me here not because he knew you would meet Kibir, but because he was worried about your current condition. Madanzo, your test is here, and it's even faster than me. Let me send you back to the Garden of Eden quickly." Madanzo, the leader of Amon's disciples and the master of the Key of Fate, actually ushered in the test of losing his power at this time, which also meant that he was about to break through to the 8th level. Link brought him back to the Garden of Eden, and Amon asked about the situation and specially instructed, "You don't have to worry about anything, just train in the Garden of Eden as usual, and build houses and gardens when you have time. Forget the power you once had, and forget that you have lost it. If you really do this and still do not change, this test will naturally be passed." Madanzo stayed in the Garden of Eden, while Joshua and the others arrived safely in the city of Salem and were stunned to see that a magnificent city had been built on the land of their hometown. When they entered the city, the original site of the town of Duk was still empty, with only a courtyard and a small building that looked very familiar. Aesop told them that it was the former residence built by Ammonius himself, and that Joshua and the others would continue to build their homes here, and everything needed was ready. The city of Salem was also looking forward to the early arrival of the miners from the town of Duk, as there were many things that needed their help. The first and most urgent thing was that the parangons in Aesop's hands were running out. Link had obtained Murin's treasure, so how could Aesop lack parangons? Murin's treasure was filled with special parangons, and Amon also needed special parangons to build the Garden of Eden, and the consumption of ordinary parangons was even greater. For example, A cold spring in the Garden of Eden required an aquatic ore and 20 ordinary parangons. Parangons were not only the currency of the continent, but also the material for making all kinds of magic tools and magical formations. The city of Salem was not yet exaggerated enough to build a defensive formation on the city walls, but Aesop had built 2 fortresses between the city of Salem and the city of Enril, and the construction of the magical formations for the fortresses used up almost all of the ordinary parangons in stock and more than half of the special parangons. These 2 fortresses were also battle fortresses, located on both sides of the road leading from Salem to the northern mountains, and each fortress could garrison nearly 1,000 soldiers. They not only guarded the road to the mines, but also the large farmlands outside the city. If Enlil City wanted to launch an attack on Salem, these 2 nails had to be removed before the siege, otherwise they would be attacked from both sides when they arrived at Salem. These 2 fortresses were the most important projects in Salem in the last 6 months, and the other important project was naturally to open up the trade routes in the charcoal marsh, but that task had already been done by Ammon and Saya. Aesop still had a batch of special parangons in his hands, but not many of them, which Ammon had left for him, and could not be used easily. They were the wealth reserves of the city, and in the future, they would need to buy strategic supplies through the trade routes. In the past few years, although large tracts of land had been reclaimed and many workshops had been built in the city, Aesop had also spent money like water. Chapter 212. Most of the parangons in Aesop's hands were ore cores instead of mined parangons. There weren't that many people who would specifically extract the parangons from the ore cores. The original tribe of cavemen had also learned the mining skills of Duk, but their mastery and proficiency were far inferior to the miners of Duk. Not only were they inefficient, but they also destroyed a lot of parangons during mining. Aesop simply ordered most of the ore cores to be sealed up and piled up like a small hill, waiting for the Duk miners to arrive. In the eyes of many, the miners of Duk were quite amazing. They could extract parangons from the ore cores with a single blow, even faster than mages. Aesop discussed with Joshua that the miners of Duk should focus on extracting parangons, even ignoring the smelting of iron that they were good at. The city of Talon would send people to build houses for them, as long as the miners made their own requests. Joshua agreed. The second day after they entered Talon, he ordered the miners to start working and extract parangons as quickly as possible. There was another thing that surprised Aesop. His guards were not the only ones accompanying the miners into the city. The miners also brought back more than 60 captives, all of whom were strong and powerful Highlanders. The combat power of these miners was too strong. If it really came to a critical juncture, the 12 judges could still lead the troops on the battlefield. According to the customs of the continent, prisoners of war were reduced to slaves. Half of these slaves belonged to the lords who captured them, and the other half to the kingdoms and cities, just like the distribution of spoils of war. Warriors on the battlefield captured prisoners of war. Slaves were also personal wealth. Kingdoms and city-states had other uses for these slaves, such as exchanging them for their own captives or demanding ransom from the other party. With so many prisoners of war, Aesop's mouth was crooked with joy. Joshua gave him an idea. Instead of dealing with prisoners of war in the traditional way on the continent, he told them that slaves could buy their freedom. As long as they worked for the city of Talon or the lords, they could be paid a portion of the reward. If the reward accumulated to the required ransom, they could be freed. Aesop was taken aback at first, but when he regained his composure, he laughed out loud and patted Joshua's shoulder. Before you guys came, someone had already recommended you to be the secretary of Tulang. You're truly a talent. The people of Duk have always been miners. I think they should be merchants. This business is too smart. Not only will it weaken the resistance of the captives, they won't dare to cause trouble or slack off, but it will also make them work harder. On the surface, they will suffer losses, but in reality, they will make a huge profit. Joshua nodded and said, yes, anyone who dares to cause trouble will have their remuneration deducted. If the prisoners of war are exchanged, they will also be arranged to be the last. If war breaks out and we capture prisoners of war, we can do this. Speaking of exchanging prisoners of war, the cost of training these giant warriors is very high. I think one giant warrior should be exchanged for at least 3 prisoners of war on our side. Aesop smiled and said, "Okay, from now on, you are the scribe of Salem. There are many specific matters, so you will be in charge of laying out the rules for me." At the same time that the miners from Duk arrived in Talar, there were 2 major events that took place in the city. Aesop was extremely busy, and he desperately needed a capable helper. It was the perfect time to appoint Joshua as his scribe. The first major event was the official opening of the trade route in the charcoal marsh. The thorns were cut to fill the marsh, gravel was laid as the foundation, and the burnt dry soil was paved. It was wide enough to accommodate 2 ordinary carriages, and there were also 3 relay stations in the marsh for caravans to rest. The original plan for this trade route was to take 3 months to open, but the actual construction period was increased by half a month. It took Amon a month to explore a road that was 2 people wide in the marsh. Saya's laborers started work from the entrance after Amon entered the marsh, and a month and a half after Amon walked out of the marsh, the official trade route was immediately opened. With the strong support of Goliath, Governor Shmuel mobilized 1,500 laborers, all of whom were strong men. What was more worth mentioning was that these people did not go back after the trade route was built, but directly entered the plains of Duk and went to the city of Talang. Talang was short of people, and the sudden arrival of so many strong laborers was naturally a timely help, but Aesop did not know whether to laugh or cry. The origins of these 1,500 or so laborers were very complicated. There were rogues and proletarians from Saya and the surrounding areas, bankrupt craftsmen, soldiers with military records, and even exiled prisoners, punished scoundrels, and local ruffians. Many of them had been conscripted into the army and received military training, but they were troublemakers and unsettled elements in their hometowns, and many of them were regarded as troublemakers by the villagers. They had heard that the plains of Duk was a place full of opportunities, and that homeless people with nothing could even become great lords. The governor of the city of Talang was once a slave. Governor Shmuel banished all these troublemakers to Talang, and it could be considered as taking what they needed. How to manage this group of people was also a headache for Aesop, and Joshua quickly formulated the latest laws of the city, incorporating most of these people into the army, and as long as they obeyed the management of the city and made meritorious deeds in the future, they would be given corresponding land. The city of Talang now lacked everything but land. The plains of Duk was full of uncultivated fertile land, and from the 2 battle fortresses in the north to the fortress at the edge of the charcoal marsh in the southwest corner, the area around Talang with a radius of about 200 miles was under their control. A circle could be drawn on the sand table and a piece of land could be taken out, waiting for these explorers to claim it with their merits. Thanks to Pharaoh Lazith II for his generosity. Meng had drawn such a circle on the map of the plains of Duk, and Pharaoh had kept it the same. Reward. Give him his territory. The second major event in Talang was that the battle fortresses on both sides of the road to the north had finally been completed. The magic formations had been set up, and the walls and fortresses had long been built. There were 2 things missing in the first place: a large number of ordinary parangons to be placed in the various positions of the magic formations, and there were not that many soldiers stationed there. After the arrival of the miners from Duk, the missing parangons were mined in a very short time, and the magic formations could finally be operated at any time. These 2 battle fortresses could each house nearly 1,000 soldiers, and there were warehouses stocked with all kinds of supplies, which could be defended for a long time. Each fortress had a magic formation that could protect the fortress when activated, and could launch a counterattack under the control of the mages. This was designed by Amon and linked together, with reference to the magic formations of Montefiore and Babylon City. Although they were only small-scale fortresses, they were still shockingly expensive. 1,500 peasants had officially joined Talang, so the population of the city was now more than 7,000. Excluding the old, the young, the women, the children, and the craftsmen who had to work, about 3,000 soldiers could be organized in times of war. This was almost enough to make every citizen a soldier. Aesop had sent 1,000 soldiers to be stationed in the 2 battle fortresses, 500 soldiers in each fortress. This was the largest regular army he could send out. The rest of the people in Talang could not be completely free from work. Usually, they had to cultivate the wilderness, smelt iron, hunt all kinds of monsters, raise livestock, and process materials. Only when war broke out would they be able to pick up weapons and become soldiers of the city. There were now 1,000 regular soldiers stationed outside the city, and another 2,000 reserve troops in the city. Usually, they would take time to assemble for drills. The size of the reserve troops was barely equivalent to the size of a legion. There was no shortage of leadership talents. The main generals of the Andhra Legion of the Empire of Igut were all in Talang. The head of the Andhra Legion was Aman, the chief priest was George, the front commander was John, and the captain of the guards was Madanzo. It was also a newly formed miscellaneous army that was trained into an elite division by Aman. Now, under the leadership of John and George, Talang seemed to have gone through a reincarnation, repeating what had happened in the Andhra Legion. The 36 guards that John had brought to the plains of Duk had become the generals of Talang, and were usually responsible for taking turns to drill the formation. On the day that the fortress was built, the Talang Legion was also established. Unlike the legions in other parts of the continent, there was no special position of chief priest in the Talang Legion. The head of the legion directly led the priests to cooperate with the frontline soldiers in battle. Aman was already a god on the altar and was currently training in the Garden of Eden, so he naturally would not be the head of the legion. Madanzo was also training in the Garden of Eden and could not go to the battlefield for the time being. The head of the legion was the chief priest of the city, George, and the front commander was still John. Although George and John had the experience of forming and training the Andhra Legion, they knew in their hearts that the current Talang Legion could not be compared to the Andhra Legion of the past. Although the Andhra Legion was a newly formed miscellaneous army at the time, it was still a regular legion of the Empire of Igut, with 5,000 official legionnaires, all of whom were at least first-level warriors. The Talang Legion, on the other hand, only had 1,000 regular soldiers and 2,000 reserves, of which nearly 1,000 were not warriors. On the other hand, the total number of the Andhra Legion, including the logisticians, reached 20,000 during the war, and there were not that many non-combat logisticians to support the evacuation of Talang, so they had to rely on the trade route to replenish their supplies. George and John had never even commanded such a weak legion in battle, and they were facing the elite giant legion of the Assyrian kingdom. Unlike the high-ranking generals, the people of Talang were full of confidence in victory, largely because of the prestige of Ammonius. Their Ammonius was a supreme general who had shaken the world and was almost invincible. Fortunately, the trade route was opened at the right time, and personnel and supplies were replenished in a timely manner. Sayo really gave them face. He organized a large caravan, followed behind the civilian laborers who opened the road, and entered Talang as soon as the road was opened. Aesop personally went to the pass at the edge of the charcoal marsh to welcome the former master and his caravan into Talang, and hosted a banquet in the governor's residence. Sihathar was filled with emotion as he looked at the magnificent city of Talang. His former slave was now the lord of the city. It was a place full of miracles. No wonder so many wandering explorers came to the plains of Duk in search of dreams and opportunities. He drank a little too much at the banquet, and finally put his arm around Aesop's shoulder and said, "Aesop, you are now the governor of Talang. Think about me, I've worked so hard for so many years, even risking my life for the title of nobility." Aesop comforted him, "Master Sayo, you should also look at others, among the merchants who did business with you back then, who is richer than you now. You already have the title of deputy director of the city's property department, and your business is doing much better than before. There are very few merchants like you on the continent, so don't worry too much." Governor Aesop actually called him Master Sayo again, and the wealthy merchant was so excited that he drank several glasses of wine in a row. "I only said a few words when I saw you, and my heart is usually very calm. Otherwise, how could I have grown so fat? Is it easy to do business to my extent? Have you ever seen a master personally cross the desert to collect debts? It was in the desert that we met Ammonius." Aesop laughed. "Yes, you are indeed doing better than others, and you put in more effort than others, so your business is also bigger. I was really surprised to see you this time. I didn't expect you to come in person with a caravan. Sihather patted the fat on his chest and said, "Isn't that my style? I always look for business opportunities in person, not to mention that God Amon has summoned me." "How can I only send my men here?" Aesop asked again. "Master Sihather, you are indeed very capable. How did you manage to pass the checkpoint with so many armors, weapons, and horses?" Sio replied with some pride, "Warhorses are easy. Because it was a long journey, each carriage was equipped with a few more horses, and the warhorses were mixed in. As for weapons and armors, don't forget that I am also a logistics officer of the Inyaira army, so I naturally have my ways." Lord Dick of Straits and the Inyaira army stationed at the border were also very generous. I paid enough taxes, and they let me through without careful inspection. As for Saya, he was even more cooperative, and even asked me if I needed to buy a batch of supplies nearby. Aesop stood up and raised his cup. "Master Sio, I toast you. You have solved the urgent problem of withdrawing from Leng. To tell you the truth, we are soon going to war with Marduk City in the north, and we are seriously short of logistical and military personnel. That trade route is very important, and we need your continued support." Sio also stood up and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. "To become a god again, cheers. I also have a hope, to open a trading company in Leng, and when this war is won, it will also be a great victory for me." Aesop nodded immediately. "No problem, I will sign the document now, designate the best location in the city, and immediately send someone to build your shop and warehouse. You don't have to worry about anything, just do your business." The war was imminent, and in the Garden of Eden, Amon was still training, and Peloponnes was still building the spatial magic formation. Except for Medanzo, Gabriel, and Moses, everyone else in the Garden of Eden had returned to Leng. Medanzo had temporarily lost his power, Moses could not enter the plains of Duk, and Amon did not want Gabriel to participate in this war. The two fortresses north of Leng were each garrisoned with 500 soldiers, and the magic formation could be activated at any time, but to exert the full power of the formation, 2 supreme mages were needed to preside over it. Raphael just happened to arrive, and he volunteered to help guard one of the fortresses. Raphael was not a warrior on the battlefield, but it was standard for him to preside over the magic formation in the fortress. Elmar also asked to go with him, staying in the same fortress as Raphael, saying that she could take turns presiding over the magic formation in the middle of a fierce battle, but in fact, she was worried about Raphael's safety. This Ironback king had now transformed into a beautiful girl, and she was also a supreme mage. Aesop originally wanted to send Elmar to another fortress, but Elmar had to be with Raphael, and George and John had to stay in Leng to preside over the situation. There was no way to spare another supreme mage, so he had to look at Link for help. When Link saw this scene, he took the initiative to say with a smile, "Governor Aesop, now that you and George are the commanders, just treat me as a subordinate and send me to guard the other fortress." All the preparations for the war had been arranged, and Aesop sent a letter and something to Felix, the governor of Enril. The letter told Felix that the people of Duk had arrived in Leng, and that he was invited to come to Leng as a guest to meet them in person. But Felix would never come, because the letter also said that the 100 giant soldiers including Goliath had been wiped out, and there were currently 62 captives. If Felix comes to Leng as a guest, please bring the ransom for the prisoners of war, 20 parangons per person. He also swore in the name of Enril that he would never invade the city of Leng, and that his giant soldiers could accept employment from Leng and continue to mine iron and parangons in the mines, and Leng would pay half of the reward. The letter was accompanied by a large lacquered wooden box containing Goliath's huge head, which had been treated by magic and medicine and had not yet decayed, and the look of terror on his face at the moment of his death could still be seen. Aesop knew very well that as soon as this letter and wooden box were delivered to Felix, the war would start immediately. Chapter 213. 196. Fortifying the walls and clearing the fields. Felix was so shocked and furious when he received the letter that he kicked the heavy table in front of him out of the hall and smashed it to pieces, then held Goliath's head in his hand and roared at the sky. Felix had long wanted to conquer Salem in one fell swoop, but he was also waiting for the giant legion to assemble. Now he had 3,000 giant soldiers, most of the elites of the giant legion. Under the guidance of the gods, he sent Goliath to intercept and kill the miners of Duk, on the one hand because these miners were very useful, and on the other hand, to test the defensive situation of Salem as well as its strength and reaction. Unexpectedly, the plan completely failed, and none of the 100 giant warriors sent out returned, but Aesop delivered Goliath's head. In his rage, he had to fight even if he did not want to, otherwise how could Felix command the legion and lead the city? He immediately ordered the army to assemble, and 3,000 giant warriors lined up in a formation and rushed to the city of Salem. He had the most elite regular legion of the Assyrian kingdom in his hands, composed of all giant warriors, and officially known as the Adado Legion. Adado was the son of Enlil in the myth, the god of storms in the Anunnaki divine clan, but among the people were still used to calling this army the Giant Legion. Felix did not believe that the motley crew of tribesmen and wanderers in Salem could be his opponent. The only one he used to fear was Ammon, as he heard that the supreme general was very good at fighting. But now that Ammon had become a god on the altar, he would not appear directly on the battlefield. Felix's guess was right, Ammon would not participate in this war in person unless it was absolutely necessary. He was now at a critical juncture, and even the construction of the Garden of Eden was handed over to Peloponnesus. His identity had changed, his way of living had also changed, and his mentality of looking at many problems had certainly changed. He was the god believed in by the people of Salem, and as long as his statue still stood in the shrine, it would always give people confidence and hope, but if anything happened to him on the battlefield, it would be a fatal blow to morale. He could still clearly remember the time when Horus manifested his giant eagle avatar above the clouds, but it was destroyed by Enkidu with a single strike of his sword. At that time, that scene had caused such a shock to the morale of Igut's army, and the defense line at Kenmet was almost lost. The city of Salem had invested all its strength into this war, and if it was still no match, Ammon alone would not be able to turn the tide on the battlefield. He knew very well that he was not invincible. Right now, he was a symbol of protection and blessing. For the army, having a firm belief, high morale, and the eruption of combat power when they risked their lives was something that even the soldiers themselves could not imagine. Although Ammon was far away in the Garden of Eden, he could still learn about what was happening on the battlefield through the prayers and sacrifices of the people, but he was training and integrating everything he had learned before into his soul, so he needed to be undisturbed and did not even deliberately look at it. What he did not know was that in the distant Igut, Maria was looking up at the starry sky and silently calling the name of the goddess Isis. For the first time, the adoratress, whose faith was incomparably pure, was distracted during a prayer, and when she called the goddess Isis, the figure of Ammon appeared in her mind. Seth had told Maria that he would come back in 3 months to ask her what decision she had made, and when the war on the plains of Duk broke out, 2 months had passed. Felix led the giant legion to the city of Salem. Of course, he knew that the city of Salem had built 2 fortresses 50 miles north of the city, and to attack the city of Salem, these 2 battle fortresses must be removed first. If Salem wanted to set up a battle formation for a decisive battle, the best place was also the open ground between the 2 fortresses. Felix was waiting for the 2 armies to clash there and defeat the main force of the Salem Legion in one fell swoop. However, he did not encounter the army of Salem along the way. The road from Salem to the northern mines was currently the widest in the plains of Duk, and it was along this road that Felix marched. Sitting in the chariot, he could see the 2 fortresses in the distance, standing alone on high ground on both sides of the road, about 3 miles apart, but not a single person could be seen around them, and no soldiers could be seen on the walls of the fortresses. Behind the fortresses were the large fields that Salem had reclaimed in the past 2 years, and the wheat ears in the fields had been urgently harvested, but the straw was still there. The sheep on the distant hillside meadows were also gone, driven back into the city by the shepherds. Surprisingly, the city of Salem did not set up a battle formation here. At this time, the scouts reported that the army of Salem had left the city, numbering about 1,000, and were waiting in battle formation outside the city, and did not come here to meet the enemy. Felix looked at the two fortresses and sneered, "I heard that the city was built by cavemen. Do they know how to fight or not? If I had built these two fortresses, I would definitely set up a battle formation here, and they would be able to advance and retreat at will." As the head of the giant legion, Felix's view was not wrong at all, but the situation in Salem was different. If George had led the NRA Legion back then, even if the individual combat power of the soldiers was not as good as that of the giant legion, they would still have formed a battle formation here, relying on the fortresses on the left and right wings to fight. But now many of the people in the Salem Legion had not really been on the battlefield, but many of the people sent by Saya had fought in wars. So George did not want to set up a battle formation at the beginning and fight head-on. If he lost the first battle, the morale of the whole army would fall from its highest point to its lowest point in an instant, and it might even collapse. Felix frowned as he looked at the empty field. The general next to him asked, "What do you think, head of the Legion, should we continue to march forward and fight under the city of Salem?" Felix shook his head. "In that case, we will be attacked from both sides, so let's take these two fortresses first as our forward bases. Don't attack at the same time for the time being, but set up two battle formations on the avenue to prevent counterattacks from the direction of Salem and the other fortress, and take one of the fortresses with all our strength first." The giant legion quickly spread out and set up defensive formations in the direction of the eastern fortress and the city of Salem, and moved all the equipment originally used to attack the city of Salem to the west, preparing to take the other fortress. The strong giant soldiers measured the distance, set up catapults, and lit torches. Groups of soldiers raised shields and carried ladders, and the chariots also set up high platforms with crossbowmen. Strangely, there was no movement in the fortress, like an empty city, quietly waiting for the giant legion to finish all the siege preparations. The general in charge of the siege said to Felix, a little puzzled, "According to the intelligence, there are clearly hundreds of soldiers in this fortress. Why can't I see a single person on the walls? Are they all too scared to show their faces? I have never fought such a battle before." Felix said expressionlessly, "They want to be cowards. Even so, they can't avoid the fate of being breached, so we'll fight as we should." There was no need to besiege the fortress, and Felix was not worried that the soldiers in the fortress would not go to war. He just wanted them to rush out of the fortress to fight, so he only needed to choose one side to attack, and as long as they occupied the walls or opened the gates, it would mean victory. Suddenly, there was a whistling sound on the silent plain, and dozens of huge fireballs flew up and smashed towards the fortress. These were stone balls mined in the mountains with fuel wrapped around them, which were then ignited and thrown out by giant catapults. They could smash down brick walls and ignite houses in the city to cause fires. The catapults built by the Highlanders were particularly large, and the flying stones emitted were heavy and had a long range, making them excellent siege weapons. With no enemy in sight and no battle cries, dozens of flying stones whizzed over with flames. Even the strongest warriors would find it difficult to withstand this blow head-on, and the power of the first wave of attack was chilling. However, when the huge flintstones flew over the walls, the fortress seemed to turn into a mirror-like shadow, the air rippling and the shadow shaking for a while, as if wrapped in transparent waves of water. The flintstones seemed to have shot into invisible water, and the flames extinguished, leaving only faint smoke. Their speed slowed down rapidly, and before they could cross the walls, they fell to the ground. Felix exclaimed in a low voice, "Magic formation. How many mages do they have to be able to set up such a large formation?" Lucien, the chief priest of the giant legion, stared with wide eyes, and it took a long time before he let out a long breath and said, "Lord Felix, that is a formation that covers the entire fortress. It was not set up by the mages temporarily. Similar to the defensive formation of our capital, Nive, it is set up when the city is built and activated during battle, and it needs to be operated by mages. Looking at this scene, there must be a supreme mage presiding over it." Felix exclaimed, "A supreme mage? Could it be that there is a supreme mage in each of these two fortresses? Would they send a supreme mage here, and the city of Salem would not need to be defended? Lucian replied, the chief priest of Salem, George, was originally the high priest of the temple of Isis in Igut, who knows what other tricks he has up his sleeves, and what other supreme mages he has recruited to work for him. This magic formation is really not small, Salem is quite rich, and there are experts guiding it. To build such a fortress, the investment of manpower, material, and financial resources is not a small amount. Felix said with a gloomy face, Salem is indeed a good place, as long as we conquer it, all the gains in the future will belong to us. The catapults were still firing fireballs, and plumes of green smoke rose from the sky on one side of the fortress. The air rippled like transparent water, and cracks appeared on the ground from the impact of the fireballs, then disappeared again, while the fortress remained unmoved, not even a scratch on the skin of the walls. The chariots were lined up on a high platform, and the giants on the high platform had been aiming at the battlements above the walls with giant crossbows, but after aiming for a long time, their eyes were dazzled and their hands were sore, but not a single defending soldier appeared, and the arrows were nocked but could not find a target to shoot. The frown on Felix's face grew deeper and deeper, and he asked the chief priest, how should we fight this battle? Lucian mused, if we don't break this magic formation, it will be very difficult for our long-range attacks to hurt the people in the city. But if the impact on the operation of the formation is too great, it will damage the parangons used to set up the formation, and they will need to replenish it at any time, and after a certain level, it will be difficult to continue, so this is a stupid way to attack by force. On the other hand, the formation must be activated by a mage, and such a formation must be presided over by a supreme mage. A mage cannot use magic power indefinitely, and as long as the other side is tired, the formation will stop, and then it will be our chance to attack the walls. Felix asked again, then how long do you think they can hold out? Lucian thought for a moment and replied, with this situation, if I were presiding over the formation in the city, I would be able to hold out for half a day at most. Felix, so long. Lucian explained again, this requires the cooperation of the mages, and the damaged parangons to be replenished in time. Under the current intensity of the attack, I can hold out for so long. But this is just a useless struggle, they can't kill us, and it's just a matter of time before they die. Felix said with dissatisfaction, but with such a long consumption, it is not enough to simply use flying stones to blast the city, we also need to launch a strong attack. Lucian, I suggest waiting, there will be casualties when attacking the city, and the fewer the casualties, the better. Order the catapults not to scatter, but to concentrate in one direction, try to penetrate the defense of the formation, and also destroy the opponent's formation parangons. The flying stones suddenly stopped, and then the giant soldiers were seen adjusting the position and direction of the catapults, and when the second attack began, the huge fireballs flew towards a section of the city wall. In another fortress in the distance, Link stood behind a window at the highest point of the fortress, watching from a distance as the giant legion concentrated on attacking the fortress where Raphael and Elmar were stationed, and said with a wry smile, they really know how to choose a place to attack first, they probably didn't expect that there would be two supreme mages in such a small fortress, right? Well, they really have a way, concentrating on one place to bombard the city. Beside him stood a general, originally one of Amon's personal guards, named Venani, who had now become a general in the Salem Legion. General Venani asked worriedly, how long can Lord Raphael and Lord Elmar hold out? Link, I don't know about Raphael, but Elmar's stamina is amazing, and it won't be a problem for him to hold out for 3 days on his own, and if Raphael takes turns presiding over the formation, he can certainly hold out for more than 7 days. According to George's order, if the giant legion attacks the fortress, do everything you can to hold them off for 7 days, I don't think there will be a problem. Venani added, the two lords are naturally fine, but the giant legion will not always attack with firestones, in that case, no matter how many firestones are stored, it won't be enough. I'm afraid that the number of parangons stored in the fortress is limited, and the other mages won't be able to hold out for that long. Link sneered, if that fool Felix uses up all the firestones and heavy crossbow arrows in order to attack a fortress, then he won't have to attack Salem anymore, and it's best to use all the siege supplies here as well. Salem is not protected by a magic formation, that's Commander George's intention. As for the mages I've trained in the past 2 years, I'm afraid they won't be able to hold out, and it's time to test them. Link had also been training mages in the tribe for the past 2 years, testing trustworthy people and making them swear oaths to Ammonius. It was really difficult to awaken the power of 2 sides. Although there were 12 judges out of more than 60 miners in the town of Duk, Link had only trained a few dozen mages out of thousands of people. These mages were awakened to the power of magic, but few could master the power of 2 sides. The dozens of mages in Salem were divided into 2 groups by George, both of which were sent to the 2 fortresses to assist the supreme mages in operating the magic formation to protect the fortress. In the underground hall of the central building of the fortress that was being attacked, Raphael was sitting with a staff in his hand, the parangons on the staff emitting bursts of light, showing the attack on the defensive formation. There were also 10 mages sitting around him, half of whom were cavemen, and they were helping Raphael with the staff in their hands to operate the magic formation. When the giant legion outside the city adjusted their attack and all the flying stones were concentrated in one direction, Raphael heard a faint shattering sound in his ears, and hurriedly ordered the mages resting in the fortress to replace the damaged parangons under the walls to keep the power of the magic formation from weakening. There was a lot of fighting outside the city, but the fortress was still quiet, like a landscape in a mirror, unmoving in the light and shadow. The commander of the siege was a little impatient, and he ran to Felix's carriage and said, "The flying stones we prepared are to blast open the city of Salem. We can't go on like this. Should we order a forceful attack? The soldiers in charge of the catapults are also tired." Felix replied calmly, "Let's continue the attack. The first wave of soldiers retreat to rest. The attack cannot be stopped. They should not be able to hold on any longer. Once the defense of the magic formation weakens, immediately launch a forceful attack. We cannot give the enemy a chance to catch their breath. Inform the crossbowmen to prepare for battle, and shoot down all those who are exposed on the walls." The Highlanders were good at hunting with heavy crossbows, and the giant legion who had been trained in battle formations were naturally more proficient in them. The crossbows of the giant warriors were powerful and had a long range, and they had always been a fearsome weapon on the battlefield, able to hit the enemy outside the range of the crossbows of ordinary warriors. The giant crossbowmen had been standing on the high platform for a long time. In the fortress, Elmar walked into the underground hall. Today, she was wearing a red battle robe on top of the dark golden soft armor, looking particularly bright and eye-catching. She advised Raphael softly, "You must be tired, let me take over." Raphael shook his head lightly. "I can still hold on, half of the mages should rest, let's rotate now." He ordered the mages around him to replace 5 of them. Elmar advised again, "The head of the legion told us not to exhaust our strength at once. Even if we can hold on, we should rest at the right time to last longer." Raphael smiled. "I'm not that delicate, I'm stronger than you think. It's just that this magic formation cannot be blindly resisted, it has to be weakened appropriately, otherwise too many parangons will be damaged, and then it will really not be able to hold on." Chapter 214 197 Siege Battle. Elmar had ordered the soldiers stationed in the city to hide in a safe place at the base of the wall, and the horses were led to a corner where the boulders could not hit. Outside the city, Felix showed joy on his face when he saw this scene, and shouted, "They can't hold on any longer, launch a strong attack." 2 rows of giant warriors raised their giant shields to cover the front and the sky, and carried a huge battering ram as they rushed towards the city gate. In other directions, there were also warriors with giant shields and ladders rushing towards the lower part of the city wall. Lucian gathered the mages to set up a magic formation in front of the battle formation. Countless chanting sounds came from the sky, and light fell to impose various protections on the siege soldiers. Wind blades and energy blasts cut holes in the magic formation guarding the fortress. Felix used the mages at the critical moment, letting them form a magic formation to cover the warriors' charge. By now, the mages in the fortress should be tired. Whether it was breaking through the gate or climbing the wall, the combat power of the giant warriors should not be something that the soldiers defending the fortress could resist. The crossbowmen stood on the high platform, and if anyone on the wall poked their head out to counterattack, they would immediately be shot at by the crossbows. This was the most common tactic used by the giant legion when attacking a fortress. Suddenly, many soldiers appeared on the wall of the fortress, wearing helmets and leather armor. The trained soldiers had formed a subconscious habit, and the crossbows shot at the target in an instant. This first round of shots was fast and accurate, and the giant warriors' heavy crossbows were really powerful, and some of the arrows actually hit the wall. Almost all the soldiers on the wall were hit by the arrows, but they did not fall immediately. The arrows in the air were like rain, and some soldiers were hit by several arrows in a row. At this time, the chief priest Lucian shouted, "Look carefully before shooting, those are dummies." Only then did the giant crossbowmen realize that someone had stretched helmets and leather armor out of the battlements with wooden poles, but the giant crossbowmen on the high platform had already shot the first round of arrows, and the heavy crossbows needed to be reloaded. At this moment, soldiers appeared on the wall again, and with loaded crossbows, they fired in unison from the gap in the battlements. Their accuracy was still a bit lacking, and they were far less well-trained than the giant crossbowmen, but this sudden volley of shots still hit quite a few giant warriors, and more than a dozen giant crossbowmen fell from the platform. Battle cries finally rang out, and the attacking soldiers also rushed up, raising their shields and setting up ladders. The giant crossbowmen no longer fired in unison, but instead aimed at the walls above the attacking soldiers and fired alternately, making it impossible for the defenders to stop the giant soldiers from ascending the walls. Suddenly, there was a buzzing sound in the air, and dozens of fire snakes fell, turning into a sea of fire along the long ladder set up by the giant soldiers. This was the counterattack launched by the magic formation. The soldiers of the giant legion also rushed to the gate, and the battering ram hit the gate with a loud bang. The gate did not move, but the entire wall nearby trembled slightly. The magic formation connected the impact of the city gate with the city wall. Either the formation was broken, or the entire tower was destroyed. Hot oil poured down from the tower, ignited in the air, and fell on the shields of the giants, turning it into a sea of fire. Even if the giant warriors attacking the gate were not doused with oil, their shields would be too hot to hold after a while, and they would drop their shields with a strange cry, only to be hit by stones thrown from the city. The giant crossbowmen then fired arrows, and many of the soldiers fighting back on the wall were also hit by arrows, some lying on the battlements with arrows stuck in them, some falling down, and there were casualties on both sides. The giant legion first bombarded the walls with flint stones, consuming the defensive power of the fortress's magic formation, and once the two sides clashed, the battlefield was extremely fierce. The magic formation surrounding the walls suddenly flashed, and the crossbow bolts shot by the giant crossbowmen seemed to be pulled by the viscous air, their range greatly reduced, and they fell to the ground midway. The power of this magic formation suddenly recovered. Felix turned to look at Lucian, his expression clearly blaming the chief priest for his error in judgment. How did the other side's magic formation suddenly recover its power? Didn't they say that it would be difficult to hold on after half a day? Lucian's face was also a little ugly, and he whispered, "This is a last-ditch struggle, they can't hold on much longer, we have already attacked the walls." Felix immediately ordered the chariots set up on high platforms to move forward. No matter how good the magic formation was, it would not be able to stop so many crossbows at close range. But as the crossbowmen moved forward, they entered the range of the bows and arrows of the defending soldiers. The arrows and crossbows of both sides shot at each other in the air, and the people on the walls kept throwing down the long ladders with oil and boulders, and the sounds of wailing and shouting mixed together. In the underground hall of the fortress, Elmar had replaced Raphael's position, and the 10 mages who had just assisted in setting up the formation had all been replaced. Raphael was instructing the 6 generals in the city. The first force must hold on and consume their flint and heavy crossbow bolts. These things are not easy to replenish, and once they lose their spirit, the next step will be easy. As long as this attack is repelled, our soldiers will also have real confidence and learn how to fight. The reason why Felix mobilized the siege equipment and concentrated on attacking a fortress was because he received a report from the scouts shortly after he set up the formation that the troops of the Salem Legion that went out of the city stayed outside the city for a while before returning with their banners, and did not dare to rush to the front line to reinforce the fortress, so he attacked with confidence. In Felix's battle plan, by taking this fortress in half a day's time, the other fortress would lose its support, and the defending soldiers would fall into despair as they watched the fortress fall into a state of despair. Then, they would be able to take it down with the momentum. These two fortresses would become the forward bases for the attack on Salem, and then the advance would be unstoppable. But the situation was unexpected, and after a fierce attack from morning until dusk, at the cost of nearly 100 casualties, the fortress was still not breached. The magic formation guarding the fortress was still running, and its power was adjusted according to the intensity of the attack, and it could launch a sudden counterattack while defending. When the fire dragons in the air poured down the long ladders of the siege, Lucien also directed the mages in the giant legion to activate the magic formation, and streams of ice mist rolled up and blew away the fire dragons. The scene was both tragic and dazzling. Lucien was very shocked. The fortress's defensive formation had been running for most of the day. Was the supreme mage presiding over the formation not tired yet? He had commanded the mages to set up the formation to assist in the siege, and he was already feeling a little tired. At the critical moment, he must not be discouraged, otherwise all his previous efforts would be in vain. Lucien directed the focus of the mages to avoid the most heavily guarded gate, and rays of light fell on the giant warriors who were rushing up the long ladders to the top of the wall. The arrows and stones shot by the defending soldiers were blocked by the giant shields, and the magic formation guarding the fortress was also breached by Lucien's magic, and there were already soldiers about to climb up the wall. The sound of drums conveying orders sounded in the fortress, and armored guards appeared on the wall that was about to be captured. The skilled giant crossbowmen then cooperated with the attacking soldiers to shoot at this section of the wall. Many of the defending soldiers were hit by arrows, and there were already giant warriors brandishing machetes and jumping up the wall. As long as these people gained a foothold on the wall, the giant warriors behind them would continue to rush up. At the critical moment, a strange roar was heard, and a huge long tail flashing with golden light suddenly rolled up from the air and swept down fiercely, knocking over 3 long ladders erected on the wall. The defending soldiers rushed over and surrounded the 5 or 6 giant warriors who had climbed up the wall, taking the opportunity to slash and kill them. The soldiers of the giant legion who were watching the battle outside the city were stunned for a moment. There was a terrible monster in the fortress. Could it be that the mage presiding over the magic formation was also proficient in summoning magic? Lucien raised his staff in shock, and the priests around him chanted in unison. The smoke and flames in the air quickly condensed, and a giant snake appeared, emitting thick smoke and flames as it pounced towards the city. No matter what, he must break through the gap and use this giant snake transformed from magic to fight the monster. But after the long tail swept over, there was no sound of the monster. The giant crossbowmen outside the city only felt a blur in front of them, and then they saw a beautiful girl suddenly jump on the battlement. The girl was petite and wore a fiery red battle robe, which was so bright and dazzling on the battlefield that the crossbowmen even forgot to shoot at her for a moment. Although the girl was beautiful, the thing in her hand was terrible. Her slender hand was raised high above her head, holding a stone ball that was half the diameter of her body. It was wrapped in fire hemp that was extinguished after burning halfway. It was the firestone that the giant army had just shot into the city with the catapult. As soon as the girl appeared, she swung the big stone ball and smashed it towards Lucien. With a sharp whistling sound, the stone ball reignited in mid-air due to the violent friction with the air. If this hit, the supreme mage Lucien would definitely be turned into a flying pile of flesh and blood on the spot. It was too sudden. Lucien was directing the magic formation to assist the warriors in attacking the city, and it was too late to dodge. He hurriedly raised his staff, and the giant snake that had just condensed in the air met the huge stone ball. The giant snake was smashed into pieces, but the flying stone fell into the magic formation. With such a large stone rolling over, it would not be a problem to kill 2 or 3 mages. At this time, there was another loud roar, and a dazzling brilliance flew over, smashing the huge stone ball into pieces. It turned out that Felix, the head of the giant legion, suddenly took a step in the air on his chariot and jumped in front of the formation of the mages with his giant sword. Felix himself was also an 8th-level supreme warrior, and due to his talent as a Highlander giant, his strength was amazing. When Elmar saw that Felix had made a move, she shouted from the tower, "Stupid and stupid big man, if you have the guts, come up to the wall and fight me." Lucien hurriedly shouted from behind, "Lord Head, you are the commander of the entire army, you can't go up the wall yourself." He was afraid that Lucien would really rush up the wall, and if the commander was trapped in the fortress and the soldiers could not attack, then the morale of the army would be in chaos. Unexpectedly, not only was there a supreme mage in the city, but the girl was also obviously a supreme warrior. Looking at the flying stone she threw with her bare hands, she could even fight with Felix. No matter how powerful Felix was, he was not an invincible warrior like Enkidu, not to mention that he was the commander of the entire army. Even if he could rush up the wall alone, he could not act so rashly. He waved his giant sword in front of the formation and shouted, "Girl, if you have the guts, come out of the city and fight me." The crossbowmen finally released their arrows, and dozens of heavy crossbow strings sounded, and huge arrows shot towards Elmar with the sound of breaking through the air. Elmar suddenly took out a long-handled mace from behind the wall and swung it in the air, smashing the crossbow arrows into pieces with a gust of wind. The length of this mace was twice as long as her height, and the huge hammer head was covered with spikes, so the giant warriors on the opposite side were dumbfounded. Elmar shot down the arrows and pointed at Felix with the mace in her hand. "Do you think I'm as stupid as you? Come out of the city and fight you. In your dreams. Aren't you attacking the city? Then come in yourself." After saying that, she turned and jumped off the wall and disappeared. Felix stared at her for a long time with his giant sword in his hand, and just then, another scout sent to the front galloped back to report that the army of Salem had moved out again. At dusk, the fierce attack of the giant legion finally came to an end, and the sounds of fighting subsided. The fortress withstood the first round of attacks, and the defending soldiers also paid the price of nearly 100 casualties. 500 soldiers had such a high casualty rate, and if they had been in formation on an open field, the battle formation would have been broken long ago. Fortunately, they relied on the fortress to defend. Except for some of the civilians sent by Saya, these soldiers had never experienced war before. When the siege battle first started, everyone was very nervous, and when the tension reached a certain point, people either became numb or collapsed. After successfully withstanding the fierce attack of the giant legion, everyone had real confidence instead of unreasonable fanatical confidence. It turned out that they could also fight. In the underground hall in the center of the castle, Raphael was resting. There was a parangon in each of the two castles that could show each other's image, and Raphael was talking to Link in the other castle. Link asked, "What are the casualties?" Raphael replied, "With the support of the magic formation and the fortress, there are still nearly 100 casualties, and the casualties of the defending side are similar to those of the attacking side. The combat effectiveness of the giant legion is indeed strong." Link, Commander George said that the combat effectiveness of the army is fought, and that was the case with the Inare Legion. The giant legion is coming aggressively, and the first wave of attacks is the fiercest. If you can withstand it, you will win. Raphael, this kind of siege consumes too much, and the giant legion can't be consumed indefinitely, but I don't know how many more rounds of such fierce attacks they can launch. Even if the soldiers can hold on, the impact of the magic formation is too great, and the spare parangons I have stored here have been consumed by half today. Link, I have been watching the battlefield. Their consumption of firestones and heavy crossbow arrows is very high, and these things can't be replenished at will in a short period of time. Out of the 50 catapults, 7 were damaged. I didn't expect you to be so difficult to deal with. Having paid such a high price, they should launch a more intense round of attacks, and you have to prepare for another fierce battle. If you can't hold on, I will send reinforcements immediately. Raphael shook his head and said, "In any case, I will hold on to the next round of attacks. George has ordered you not to act rashly in the first 2 rounds of attacks, unless the magic formation is broken, and Elmar will take us to break through to your side. Before breaking through, I need you to activate the formation and send troops out of the city to feign an attack. I think it's time for Salem to act according to plan now. By dusk, the attacks had to stop, and the giant legion should also rest. The soldiers launched 3 waves of attacks in rotation, but they did not take the fortress, and the army that was on guard also stood for a day. It was not suitable for large legions to fight after dark, and the crossbowmen who shot the arrows could not see the target clearly, so the whole army needed to camp, eat and rest, and send scouts to stand guard in all directions. The location of the 2 fortresses was a bit awkward, and it was a bit far for Felix to retreat back to Enril, so the army had to spend the night on the road. He had planned to retreat 3 miles back to camp, and then organize a strong attack tomorrow. The quartermaster reported the consumption of the day's battle. In addition to nearly 100 casualties, 1/3 of the firestones and heavy crossbow arrows carried by the army had been used up. The catapults threw stones, and in theory, as long as the weight did not exceed the limit, stones of about the same size could be thrown. But well-trained soldiers used stone balls of specific specifications and shapes to hit the target with the longest range and the most accurate hit rate, and the firestones were specially mined and processed. The heavy crossbow arrows, of course, also required specialized craftsmen to make, and there were many processes involved, and they were important strategic materials. It was impossible to carry too many firestones and heavy crossbow arrows in the army, and they were all rationed according to the needs of the battle. The supplies needed to be continuously transported to the front line by the logistics and military supply teams. Felix had originally planned to break through the walls of Salem and occupy the fortresses, but he did not expect that he would not succeed today. Looking at the situation, the firestones and heavy crossbow arrows carried by the Legion would be used up by the time the 2 fortresses were captured, and he hurriedly ordered the logistics team to urgently transport them from Enril. While the logisticians were setting up camp, most of the soldiers in the Legion did not rest. After the siege battle formation retreated, the remaining 2,000 soldiers again set up a military formation on the avenue, and there was a murderous aura in the dusk. According to the news reported by the scouts, the Salem Legion had more than 1,000 men in formation outside the city in the morning, but they soon withdrew and returned to the city. In the afternoon, more than 1,000 people came out of the city and lined up towards the 2 strongholds. Many of the soldiers were holding torches that had not been lit yet. It was obvious that they wanted to take advantage of the night to provide reinforcements. Were they going to fight a night battle? Fighting at night was most feared when men and horses trampled on each other in the chaos, unable to distinguish between friend and foe, so Felix ordered the army to maintain the tightest assault formation and wait for the decisive battle. If they could defeat the main force of the Salem Legion, the 2 fortresses that were waiting for reinforcements would collapse by themselves sooner or later. Chapter 215. 198. Virtual reality. But they waited and waited until midnight and the moon was in the sky, but there was still no sign of the Salem Legion. Finally, another scout reported that the Salem Legion advanced all the way and lit torches on the way, looking like a fire dragon from a distance, but after 30 miles out of the city, they suddenly turned around and went back. Felix waited for most of the night in vain. The general next to him asked, "Lord Head, they suddenly retreated at night, probably because they sent scouts to find that we were already waiting in formation and did not dare to fight. Should we pursue or not?" Felix glared and shouted, "How do we pursue? Do you want me to form a formation and chase them for 50 miles in the middle of the night? We won't be able to catch up at this distance, and by the time we reach the city, we will have not rested for a day and a night. Go back to camp and rest, and send out guards to stand guard at all times." In the underground hall of the fortress, Raphael was still talking to Link through the communication parangons in the 2 magic formations, only to hear Link laughing. "Felix has been standing in formation for most of the night in the cold wind, and finally can't stand it anymore and wants to go to sleep. It's a bit far, and it's not convenient for them to return to Enril, so they retreated 3 miles back and set up camp." Raphael smiled bitterly. this battle is quite wicked. It's not a regular battle. Who made the battle plan? It doesn't seem like Lord George's style. Link laughed and said, I did this many years ago when I led my people to hunt down those ferocious beasts in the mountains. We can't fight those beasts head-on. Elmar giggled beside Raphael. I knew it was your idea, not letting people eat and sleep well. Link, no matter what, the fortress must be defended, otherwise everything is just empty talk. You guys have a good rest, leave the rest of the night to me. The Salem Legion seemed to have expected that Felix would attack the fortress first on the way, and that they would not be able to take it down in a day, so they went out of the city early in the morning and lined up in a battle stance, then retracted their troops and went back to eat. When it was almost sunset, they lined up and went out of the city, assuming the posture of reinforcing the fortress at night, but halfway through, they retracted their troops and went back to sleep, tormenting Felix. The soldiers of the Giant Legion finally rested after a tiring day, and Felix sent out patrols to take turns to keep watch. In the latter half of the night, when everyone was sleeping soundly, the fortress where Link was located in the distance suddenly shone brightly. The magic formation inexplicably activated, and a huge curtain of light shrouded the surroundings. A gate opened, and General Wanani rushed out, leading a group of cavalrymen in bright armor. Hundreds of soldiers also appeared on the city walls, beating war drums and blowing bugles. The chaotic battle cries soared into the sky and were deafening. What rushed out of the castle was a cavalry of 100 men, led by Amon's former personal guard general. They were all armored warriors, and in terms of combat power, they were no less than the giant warriors. Although there were not many of them, they were the elites of the Salem Legion. The Giant Legion was already on guard, and Felix had ordered them to keep an eye on the fortress. The vigilant giant warriors hurriedly pulled out their weapons and rushed forward to meet the enemy, and in the haste, torches were thrown all over the ground. Such a big movement of course alarmed the sleeping soldiers in the camp, and they picked up their weapons, put on their armor, and got out of their tents. Felix hurriedly assembled a cavalry team and rushed over. When Wanani saw that they had alarmed the large group, they turned their horses away and galloped towards the fortress. The giant warriors in the rear chased outside the castle, and suddenly countless sharp rays of light shot out from the sky. It was the counterattack launched by the magic formation, instantly taking down dozens of enemies who had chased close to them, while the cavalrymen who left the city had fled into the fortress under the cover of the magic formation. Then the light of the magic formation suddenly disappeared, and the surroundings were dark again. Link's tactic was not to rush over to reinforce Raphael, but simply to not let the Giant Legion sleep well, but to go out of the city to attack was also a big risk, so he sent elite cavalry. The scale of this battle was not large, and the sudden charge killed more than 20 enemies, and Link also lost 8 cavalrymen, and then the gate was closed. Felix's nose was almost crooked with anger. He finally figured out the tactics of the city of Salem, which was to use the powerful magic formation protection of these two fortresses to contain and disturb the Giant Legion, and let him expend his combat power here. What was consumed was not only the siege supplies, but also the stamina and morale of the soldiers. Although the giant warriors were strong, they were not made of iron after all. They needed rest and the encouragement of victory. They could not help but be restrained and disturbed. The next morning, the generals of the Giant Legion were discussing the military situation in Felix's tent. Judging from yesterday's battle, the other party's fighting style was very shameless, and they did not want to set up a battle formation to decide the outcome, and their main purpose was to hold, contain, consume, and disturb. But Felix's purpose was to capture and conquer the city of Salem, and the logistical cost of the Assyrian kingdom crossing the plateau was too high, and once a large legion was launched into battle, the battle must be finished quickly. There were two choices in front of Felix. One was to continue to attack the fortress where Raphael was, advance step by step, and win the first victory, nibble away at the enemy's effective forces, and uproot the strategic stronghold of Salem. But the fortress's defensive strength was beyond the Giant Legion's expectations, and after a day of fierce attacks, they did not manage to take it down. Such a magic formation was built in a small fortress, and not only was there a supreme mage presiding over it, but it could also summon terrifying monsters, and even the girl who jumped out of the walls was a supreme warrior. It seemed unfathomable. If they consumed too much combat power while attacking the fortress, they would not be able to continue attacking Salem in a short period of time, and even give the enemy an opportunity to counterattack. The most difficult thing to judge now was how much more effort would it take to break that fortress. The second option was based on the assumption that the fortress was full of the elites of Salem, and they happened to encounter the strongest fortress, so it might be much easier to attack the other fortress. But what happened in the second half of last night clearly proved that the other fortress was also protected by a magic formation, and it was also presided over by a supreme mage. As for how strong its defensive strength was, it would be impossible to figure out without a fierce attack. Perhaps the other fortress was easier to attack, and if it was successfully occupied, it could also reverse the strategic situation. The third option was to directly attack the city of Salem. If the city of Salem put its most important forces in the two fortresses, then the main city's defenses would be weak. Both Felix and Lucien unanimously judged that Salem could not have the same magic formation as these two fortresses. For a city like that to build a magic formation of that scale, it would take 100 years of operation and countless manpower, material, and financial resources. Only a kingdom could afford the consumption of activating it at full power during a war, and if there were not enough supreme mages and mages to take turns presiding over the formation, it would not be able to operate at all. So it might be easier to move the siege firepower to the city of Salem, take a section of the city wall and rush into the city with all their might, than to attack these two fortresses. The generals discussed all morning about which of the three options to choose, and finally decided to concentrate on attacking the fortress where Raphael was located. The reason was simple: they had already spent a lot of money, and maybe they were just a little bit away from breaking the magic formation in the fortress, and giving up at this time would be equivalent to wasting all their previous efforts. There was a prerequisite for continuing to attack the fortress, and that was not to let that fortress receive reinforcements, so Felix immediately formulated a battle plan. The giant legion consisted of cavalry, chariot soldiers, sword and shield soldiers with spears, crossbowmen, and stone throwers. Their cavalry was not large in number, because the giant warriors were too tall and sturdy for ordinary warhorses to withstand the giant warriors' long-distance galloping. Chariot soldiers were the main branch of their charge, and because Enrol lacked enough warhorses to pull the chariots, the number of chariots was also limited. Stone throwers were a long-range combat force, mainly used to attack walls and fortresses, and could also bombard military formations. Crossbowmen set up high platforms on chariots to shoot arrows was also one of the tactics of siege. As for the majority of sword and shield soldiers, they could be used in various combat situations. Giant warriors could pick up heavy shields and wield long swords to fight, and each was also equipped with a spear that could be thrown from a distance during combat. Felix divided the giant legion into two parts, with more than 1,000 cavalry and sword and shield soldiers forming two battle formations between the two fortresses, on the one hand to prevent anyone from rushing out of the fortress where Link was located, and on the other hand to guard against counterattacks from the direction of Salem. The rest of the crossbowmen, chariot soldiers, stone throwers, and hundreds of elite sword and shield soldiers were concentrated outside the fortress where Raphael was located, intending to take it down in one fell swoop. Felix did not immediately launch a battle, and the battlefield was calm the next day. He arranged for the soldiers to take turns on guard, while most of the rest rested where they were. It had been a day and a night, and many of the soldiers did not even sleep well. Just as the generals were holding a meeting, the scouts reported that the Salem Legion had left the city again, this time with much more movement than yesterday, advancing in formation outside the city, with war drums beating in unison and shouts of killing, as if they were really at war with someone. They also fired thousands of arrows when the chariots charged, then sent people to pick up the arrows that had fallen to the ground, and then reformed the formation, while the chariots behind rushed out again with the sword and shield soldiers, and so on and so forth. Felix froze when he heard the news, then slapped the table and cursed, "Damn it, they're actually practicing military formations at this time. What were you doing earlier? Are you sure that we won't attack the city?" Lucien frowned and said, "For a motley crew, this is the best time to practice formations. Everyone is in danger when a large army is pressing down on the border, unlike doing hard labor during normal times. It's just that the commander-in-chief is really bold. Isn't he afraid of fighting us in a hurry?" Felix scolded, "They have no intention of fighting at all. As long as our army moves, they will definitely withdraw their troops back to the city. They just want to fight a defensive battle relying on the strong city. Yesterday's formation outside the city was just a pretense to disturb us from resting. Today's military formation outside the city is to provoke me to give up the fortress and march forward. I won't fall for this trick. Pass down the order. As long as they don't advance more than 30 miles from the city, we will ignore them. Today, the whole army will rest and reorganize, and tomorrow we will continue to attack that fortress." There was no fighting on this day, and the giant legion waited in place to rest. As Felix expected, the Salem Legion was practicing military formations outside the city, and when they saw that Felix was not fooled, they withdrew their troops back to the city at dusk and did not march forward to reinforce the fortress. In the underground hall of the fortress, Raphael said to Elmar with a gloomy face, "The giant legion has not made any movements all day, just like how you have to hold back your fist before punching. Tomorrow they will definitely launch the fiercest attack. This is a crucial battle, and the casualties will definitely be high, so you will need to take the warriors up the walls tomorrow. Be careful." Elmar also looked a little nervous. "If we really can't hold on, send a signal to Link in advance, and Link and George will attack from 2 directions to cover our breakout." Raphael shook his head and said, "If that's the case, the whole battle plan will be ruined. In any case, we must do our best to defend tomorrow. I have a batch of parangons here. Give it to the mages who are assisting in defending the city, and the formation must be kept intact." He reached out and grabbed out of thin air, pulled out a large leather bag, opened it, and saw that it was full of ordinary parangons. Elmar exclaimed, "You hid so many parangons that you didn't even know about it?" Raphael smiled faintly, "This is not from the city of Salem. Have you forgotten my background? I am also one of the heirs of a prominent noble family in the Hittite kingdom, and this is most of my property. Some of it was given to me by teacher Goliath, who said that it might be useful at a critical moment, and he was right. I have been storing it in the space ring, and this space ring was also given to me by teacher." Elmar took the leather bag and said, "I will make sure that these are your personal wealth, and when the war is won in the future, Aesop will return it to you with interest. There are spare parangons, but I don't know if the mages who help you operate the formation will be able to hold up." Raphael said with his hands behind his back, "War is equally cruel for both sides." Felix used a day to let the attacking soldiers rest, and this day's respite is more important for our mages. Rest well tonight, and prepare for a fierce battle of life and death tomorrow." Elmar looked at him with unconcealable admiration in her eyes, and suddenly grinned. "Felix really attacked the wrong fortress. He didn't know that you were here. People only know that Ammonius is invincible, but they forget that the supreme mage of the Hittite kingdom, Goliath, is a god of war. He is just not as lucky as Ammonius. You are Goliath's proudest disciple, you have followed teacher to many battles, and now you are also the high priest of Saya. It is a waste of talent to let you guard a fortress. With your talent, you can be the commander of a large legion." Raphael shook his head, "Don't praise me like that. I am still far from teacher, and teacher sent me here to receive training. Since it is training, I have to face difficult and dangerous tests, and I volunteered to guard this fortress." On the 3rd day, the most tragic battle on the plains of Duk finally broke out. Felix gathered all the heavy crossbowmen and catapults, and yesterday, urgently transported firestones and a large number of arrows from the city. This kind of head-to-head battle was a test of the will of both sides, and the giant legion began to attack with firestones in the morning, consuming the defensive power of the fortress's magic formation. Raphael did not fully operate the formation to resist, but only extinguished the flames on the stone balls. Countless huge stone balls had crossed the stone wall and smashed into the fortress, and he was trying his best to protect the weak parts of the wall from collapsing from the firestones. Under the whistling firestones that filled the sky, Lucian directed the mages to set up a formation to cover the sword and shield soldiers who drove the long ladders to attack the fortress. The giant crossbowmen also stood on high platforms, pushed forward by chariots, and arrows rained down from the sky, shooting at the defenders on the walls. The magic formation guarding the fortress remained intact after half a day of fierce fighting, but its power had begun to weaken, because the mages who assisted Raphael in operating the formation were tired after repeated shifts. In the afternoon, there were finally giant sword and shield soldiers who rushed up the walls, and the first to bear the brunt was the commander of the giant legion, the 7th-level supreme warrior Jufei. In the fortress were 6 of Amon's former guards, who were now generals leading the troops in Salem, and Elmar led the 6 generals and all the reserves in the city to rush up the walls to fight fiercely. Raphael could only activate the formation to try to prevent more reinforcements from rushing to the walls, while Lucian led the mages of the Giant Legion to also set up a formation to attack the magic formation and break through the siege. Elmar transformed into the original form of an iron back on the walls, his body covered in hard scales that were difficult for arrows to penetrate, and his sharp claws and long tail were unstoppable. Jufei fought desperately to barely hold off Elmar, and a chaotic battle broke out on the walls, which lasted until near dusk. Since it was a breach in the protective magic formation that was torn open, it was impossible to deploy too many troops, so Felix concentrated all the heavy crossbowmen to cover him, and the sword and shield soldiers took turns to attack, paying the price of more than 200 casualties on a section of the wall that was hundreds of feet long. As for the soldiers defending the fortress, more than 200 were killed, and the rest were wounded, but only lightly or severely. The Giant Legion's catapults had used up almost all the firestones stored in the camp, including the ones that had just been transported from Enril yesterday, and the arrows of the giant crossbowmen were also running out. In the end, it had become a melee battle where the mages covered the sword and shield soldiers charging into the fortress. Why did Felix pay such a high price? Because in the end, he could no longer back down. He always had a thought in his mind that the fortress was about to be taken, and one more wave of attacks would be like the straw that broke the camel's back, but the camel never died. He had been thinking this in the morning, and at noon, but as a result, he fought until dusk, and there were no more firestones and heavy crossbow arrows to use. Within the walls of the fortress, all the buildings that were not strong had been smashed down, but the walls were still there. Felix also saw his disadvantage, and if he could not break the magic formation to open a gap in the walls, the sword and shield soldiers would have to pay a high price to charge into the fortress. He wanted to reverse this disadvantage, but he never succeeded. In the end, the power of the fortress's magic formation had been reduced to its weakest, and it only connected the front defense of the walls to protect the walls. This offensive and defensive battle ended with Jufei being swept off the walls by Elmar's tail, the commander in the front was seriously injured, and all the giant warriors who rushed up the walls were killed. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.